Chapter 10-11. Shangguan Jingshan cultivated a fire attribute cultivation method. Naturally, he did not lack the heavenly fire. The bone-melting spiritual fire was refined by Shangguan Jingshan. It was an extremely powerful heavenly fire. In normal battles, Shangguan Jingshan would not use the heavenly fire at all. But now, facing Yiguchen, Shangguan Jingshan also restrained some of his contempt. Yiguchen's true strength was indeed not inferior to his talent. Shangguan Jingshan raised his hand, and his palm with rising flames brushed past the Balrog shark-toothed sword. The bone-melting spiritual fire also rose inch by inch on the body of the heavy sword. After adding the power of the bone-melting spiritual fire, the power of Shangguan Jingshan's sword move was obviously stronger. Raging Shark Sword Technique. Shangguan Jingshan stepped into the void and charged toward Yiguchen again. The heavy sword in his hand swept out horizontally, and the vigorous bone-melting spiritual fire surged up. In the end, it actually turned into a dark green flame shark that split the air and broke through the waves. It opened its mouth to swallow Yiguchen. Even a little bit of the bone-melting spiritual fire could turn one's skin and bones into ashes. Not to mention, Shangguan Jingshan had also added a powerful sword move. Be careful. Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and Mu Xingzu all looked nervous. Although they believed in Yiguchen's strength, the power of Shangguan Jingshan's move was not ordinary after all. Heavenly fire. Yiguchen's lips curled into a sneer. It was not that he did not have heavenly fire. In an instant, two pitch-black flames rose in Yiguchen's eyes. On the surface of his body, there was also a ball of pitch-black flame spreading out. Heavenly fire again. This scene caused an uproar in the surroundings again. Yiguchen's tricks were endless, and everyone was dumbfounded. Three-sword Daos, strange flame, strange thunder. What else does this Duga Wubai not have? Some warriors couldn't help but speak with envy and jealousy. Yiguchen had all the good stuff. However, they did not know how much effort Yiguchen had put in to obtain these things. Godly sword lightning manipulation art, heavenly thunder attraction. Yiguchen pointed his sword to the sky and once again drew in the power of thunder from the dark clouds in the sky, colliding with Shangguan Jingshan's sword move. The bone-transforming spiritual fire that sputtered out was also completely isolated by Yiguchen's Nirvana Heart Demon Flame. It was unable to harm Yiguchen at all. At the same time, Yiguchen activated the Nirvana Demonic Heart Flame's ability to attract inner demons. His eyes burned with black flames as he looked at Shangguan Jingshan. Shangguan Jingshan was momentarily stunned as countless inner demon illusions rose in his heart. Yiguchen seized this opportunity and used his so close, yet worlds apart identity. In a flash, he swept in front of Shangguan Jingshan. Edgeless Sword Dao, Void Destruction. Yiguchen's sword vibrated as he used the Edgeless Sword Dao to activate the ultimate move of the Great Void Sword Wave, Void Destruction. Shangguan Jingshan was indeed a top genius. He quickly regained his senses. However, the moment he regained his senses, Yiguchen's sword move had already struck him. Shangguan Jingshan could only hurriedly block with his sword. That Void Sword Wave had the ability to pierce through armor. Therefore, even with the flaming demon shark-toothed sword and the flame god armor, Shangguan Jingshan was still injured. He spat out blood as he retreated, his chest and ribs shattered. Damn it! The leader of Sun Moon College's side was the head of the Shangguan family, Shangguan Bo. His face was extremely gloomy. Cousin. Shangguan Yan's expression also changed. She didn't understand why Shangguan Jingshan would be in a daze for a moment. So that's how it is. Shangguan Jingshan adjusted his state and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with his palm. He stared at Yiguchen with a slightly fearful gaze. However, Yiguchen also knew that this ability to attract inner demons required the element of surprise. If Shangguan Jingshan was prepared, it would be very difficult to succeed. However, the effect was good. He used this opportunity to injure Shangguan Jingshan. At this moment, Shangguan Jingshan's expression was solemn. He realized that he couldn't find a way to restrain Yiguchen at all. He even took out the bone-melting spiritual fire. Yiguchen also took out a rare fire of heaven and earth that was of a high level. It seems that I can only use my real trump card. Shangguan Jingshan's expression was slightly ugly. That trump card was a secret killing move that he had specially prepared for the Battle of the Sword Master. He didn't want to reveal it now. However, Shangguan Jingshan didn't want to lose to Yiguchen, nor did he want to give up on pursuing Mu Xingzu. Just as Shangguan Jingshan was hesitating in his heart, Yiguchen once again attacked with his sword. Who cares? I can't lose this battle. Shangguan Jingshan gritted his teeth and his expression turned cold. He said coldly, Dugu Wubai, you are indeed capable to make me use my trump card. However, you will also have to pay a price. With that, raging flames surged around Shangguan Jingshan's body. A scorching and terrifying sword concept surged out. Could it be the fire sword principle? No, it's even stronger than the fire sword principle. Yiguchen's expression froze. The fire sword principle was one of the 5 elements sword principles and belonged to the ordinary level. Logically speaking, it shouldn't have such great power. However, the sword principle that Shangguan Jingshan had used at this moment was indeed the fire sword principle. Burning flame sword principle, go! Shangguan Jingshan roared like the fire god descending to the world. Streaks of blazing fire patterns emerged from under his skin. He was extremely powerful like the fire god of the sword. That's Metamorphosis Sword Principle. Shangguan Jingshan's trump card made many elites gasp in shock. The so-called Metamorphosis Sword Principle was a sword principle that was refined, sublimated, and metamorphosed from the foundation of the ordinary sword principle. For example, the Frost Sword Principle of the Solitary Cloud Sword Saint Ling Qianhen was a sword principle that was sublimated from the Ice Sword Principle. At this moment, Shangguan Jingshan's Burning Flame Sword Principle was also a sword principle that was sublimated from the Fire Sword Principle. The fact that Shangguan Jingshan could sublimate with the Fire Sword Principle was enough to show that his attainments in the Fire Sword Principle had reached the peak of perfection. Generally speaking, the Metamorphosis Sword Principle would be stronger than the original Sword Principle. The Burning Flame Sword Principle that was sublimated from the Fire Sword Principle was no weaker than the Supreme Level Sword Principle. It even belonged to the top of the Supreme Level Sword Principle, second only to the Creation Level Sword Principle. No one expected Shangguan Jingshan to have such a trump card. Good fellow, Shangguan Jingshan hit it well. Many geniuses sighed. Even Hua Wuxiu, Xuanlian, and Jiang Fengmian raised their eyebrows slightly. Obviously, they did not know about Shangguan Jingshan's trump card. However, Shangguan Bo, the head of the Shangguan family, did not look too good. Now that Shangguan Jingshan had revealed his trump card, he would lose the advantage in the Sword Sun battle. Dugu Wubai, you forced me to reveal my trump card. So, you'll lose. Burning Flame Sword Principle, Bursting Flame Break. At this moment, Shangguan Jingshan seemed to be possessed by the fire god. He held the fire demon shark tooth sword and swept it towards Yiguchen. The fierce sword chi turned into a flame stream and swept out. Yiguchen's expression turned serious as he felt the pressure. His body shook, and a blood-red sword chi rushed into the sky with a murderous intent. Azura Tribulation, Destruction of Heaven and Earth. Blood-red sword wings spread out behind Yiguchen's back and collided fiercely with Shangguan Jingshan. The collision of the two ultimate moves caused the sky to collapse and the earth to crack. Chapter 10-12. On one side was the Burning Flame Sword Principle, which had evolved from the Fire Sword Principle. On the other side was the Azura Sword Principle, which had supreme offensive power. These two types of sword principles were considered top-notch among the sword principles of the world. At this moment, when the two collided, it was like Mars colliding with Earth. The surging sword chi turned into continuous waves, shaking the surrounding void. Yiguchen felt an extremely terrifying burning power surging toward him. The genuine chi on the surface of his body vibrated, and the heart demon flame of nirvana rose, trying to block the burning power. However, the power of the Burning Flame Sword Principle was not so easy to block. Even with Yiguchen's physical body, his skin was slightly charred. Of course, on the other side, Shangguan Jingshan was not in a good condition either. The Azura sword principle, which had extremely strong offensive power, was supported by the 10,000 god tribulation and the power of heaven and earth destruction. In addition, the heaven and earth destruction was a powerful penetrating move that gathered the sword chi at one point. Ye Guqin's sword directly broke the flame sword chi, and directly touched Shangguan Jingshan's flame god's armor. Clang! The ear-piercing sound of metal colliding rang out. Shangguan Jingshan felt his chest shake violently, and an extremely strong penetrating force rushed toward him. Spiderweb-like cracks appeared on his flame god's armor. An extremely strong vibrating force also bombarded his body. Pfft! Shangguan Jingshan's body retreated quickly, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. After this exchange of blows, both of them suffered heavy injuries. Ye Guqin's arms were slightly charred, and there was a flame qi raging in his body. Shangguan Jingshan's internal organs also suffered a great impact, and his chest was heaving up and down. He blocked it. Many warriors around were stunned when they saw this. Shangguan Jingshan's burning flame sword Dao was so powerful that even Hua Wuxiu and the others did not dare to underestimate it. As for Ye Guqin, after his battle with Ouyang Fengyun, he was still able to stand up to Shangguan Jingshan. This was already surprising enough. Dugu Wubai, I've really underestimated you. Shangguan Jingshan frowned. This was different from what he had imagined. Shangguan Jingshan thought that after he used the burning flame sword Dao, it should be a one-sided crushing. However, the reality was that Ye Guqin had still managed to block his ultimate move. Again. Shangguan Jingshan's eyes seemed to spew out raging flames. He once again brandished the flaming devil shark-tooth sword, augmenting the burning flame sword Dao. Every sword strike seemed to have an endless stream of flames sweeping out, causing the surrounding temperature to rise by quite a bit. Ye Guqin similarly held his sword horizontally and used imminent skyline, clashing with Shangguan Jingshan once again. Shangguan Jingshan was like the god of fire descending to the world, raging flames burning the sky. Ye Guqin was like the emperor of swords, his sword shaking the 9 heavens. The battle between the two prodigies was too much for everyone to take in, and they were all amazed. Hua Wuxiu, who was not far away, had an extremely deep look in his eyes. To be able to fight with Shangguan Jingshan to this extent, it meant that Ye Guqin's strength was not much weaker than his. Dugu Wubai, is this your true strength? Hua Wuxiu muttered to himself. He thought that Ye Guqin had already displayed his full strength. But how could he know that Ye Guqin's true trump card had not been completely revealed? As time passed, Shangguan Jingshan's expression grew more and more ugly. He wanted to win to his heart's content and prove himself in front of Mu Xingzu. But now, he, a divine-dwelling heaven pride, had fought with Ye Guqin, who was at the spirit bridge of heaven and earth stage, for such a long time. It could be said that he had lost all face. No, I have to end this quickly. Shangguan Jingshan thought. Immediately, he activated the overbearing flame god force to the limit, and terrifying divine-dwelling stage chi gushed out. Dugu Wubai, there's no point in delaying. Let's decide the victor with one move. That's what I was thinking. Ye Guqin's eyes flashed sharply. Although he had the limit of 100,000 feet qi, he was not afraid of the consumption of his qi. But delaying was not beneficial to Ye Guqin. Burning Flame Sword Wei, Great Flame Demon God. Shangguan Jingshan lifted his sword. Blazing demonic runes emerged from the surface of his body. The blazing sword aura that rose from the Balrog Sharktooth sword also surged in the air. It vaguely transformed into a fiery demon god holding a sword. This was the Burning Flame Sword Wei's sword domain, Great Flame Demon God. At this moment, Shangguan Jingshan seemed to have merged with the Great Flame Demon God. The two raised their swords at the same time, sweeping toward Ye Guqin. As the sword fell, the scarlet sword light hundreds of feet long seemed to cut through the void, bringing with it a powerful wave of energy. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to be split in half by the sword. So strong! Shangguan Jingshan's sword set off an uproar in all directions. Yes, this sword should be able to end it. The patriarch of the Shengguan clan, Shengguan Bo, nodded slightly. TSK, cousin's sword is really strong. Dugu Wubai shouldn't be able to take it, right? Shengguan Yen sighed. In addition, Sacred Cliff College, Mu Xingzu, and the others were also watching nervously. In the face of Shengguan Jingshan's sword, Yi Guqin stood in the void, the dragon's sword behind his back whistling. Azura Blood Sea Level 18. Yi Guqin shouted coldly, the endless sword chi turning into a sea of blood, overturning. Azura Tribulation, Fall of Life. Yi Guqin's sword vibrated as it struck out. The Fall of Life, which was supported by the Azura Sword Wei, collided fiercely with Shengguan Jingshan's sword move. Silence. At the moment of collision, the world fell silent for a moment. The two sword moves collided silently in the void, strangling and annihilating each other. And in the midst of such an extreme collision, Yi Guqin was stunned. Suddenly, a figure, like a shadow, entered the battlefield. A sword pierced towards Yi Guqin's back. No. Mu Xingzu, Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and the other girls widened their eyes silently, their mouths agape. The other Sacred Cliff College disciples also widened their eyes. No one could have expected. In this extreme collision, someone actually launched a sneak attack. The person who launched the attack was none other than Yin Ju, ranked 6th on the sword ranking. That's the Yin family's death sword. A warrior cried out. The death sword was an extinct assassination move of the Yin family. When the sword was launched, it was silent. Unfortunately, the target of this sword was Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's sea of consciousness was different from that of ordinary people. It was a chaotic sea of consciousness. The sensitivity of his soul perception was also far superior to that of ordinary people. Therefore, Yi Guqin immediately sensed that a murderous intent had locked onto him. At the same time Yi Guqin launched his sword, his other hand took out the 9-dragon thunder prison, and similarly launched a powerful move. Godly sword lightning controlling art, heavenly thunder summoning. Yi Guqin activated the 9-dragon thunder prison. Above the 9 heavens, black clouds pressed down. A blazing thunderbolt struck down horizontally, entering the 9-dragon thunder prison, and then colliding with Yin Ju's death sword. Yi Guqin, with his own strength, resisted the powerful moves of the 6th and 7th on the sword ranking, 2 sword Dao prodigies. Break for me. Yi Guqin's black hair danced in the wind. He opened his mouth and shouted, like the anger of a divine king. His whole body's true qi exploded, and his sword power was fully released. Holding 2 swords with both hands, he suddenly shook them, and the violent sword energy swept out like a storm. Shengguan Jingshan and Yin Ju both retreated at the same time. Only Yi Guqin held his sword with both hands, standing in the 9 heavens. His eyes were indifferent, like the divine king of the sword, overlooking everyone. The entire sword sovereign city was silent. Chapter 1013. No one expected a prodigy like Yin Ju to launch a sneak attack. They also did not expect Yi Guqin to be able to block Yin Ju's death sword. At this moment, Yi Guqin was standing alone in the sky. There were many wounds on his body. Blood was also flowing down his sword-wielding hands. A line of blood was gradually spreading from the corner of his mouth. Everyone was shocked. They knew that although Yi Guqin had blocked Yin Ju's sneak attack, he had obviously paid a price. Yin Ju, what are you doing? Shengguan Jingshan was also injured, but he frowned and stared at Yin Ju who was not far away. To be honest, Shengguan Jingshan did not want Yin Ju to make a move. Every prodigy in the top 10 of the sword roll was arrogant. He did not want to make a move unless he had no other choice. That would be too embarrassing. Shengguan Jingshan, you can't defeat Dugu Wubai alone. 3 days will pass quickly. Do you want to see him succeed? Yin Ju said coldly. Yin Ju did not care about his reputation. He felt that he had been played by Yi Guqin in the sword catacomb. Now, if possible, he wanted to cripple Yi Guqin. That was why he launched a sneak attack. But Shangguan Jingshan frowned. But that was the truth. He had used the burning flame sword principle, but he could not defeat Yi Guqin. Thinking of this, Shangguan Jingshan fell silent and did not object. Are Shangguan Jingshan and Yin Ju going to team up against Dugu Wubai? Tisk tsk, this is the first time I've seen two prodigies in the top 10 of the sword roll team up. Do you think Jiang Fengmian will join them? That's hard to say. After all, Dugu Wubai is their rival in love. Many people looked at Jiang Fengmian. Strength of 1,000 men mode didn't need to avoid group attacks. Therefore, although Yin Ju's sneak attack was despised by some people, they couldn't refute it. Jiang Fengmian stood straight, his blue hair fluttering in the wind. He frowned slightly and stood with his hands behind his back, as if he still had no intention of making a move. Jiang Fengmian's attitude made some Sacred Cliff College disciples sigh in relief. If Jiang Fengmian also joined in, then Yi Guqin might really be in danger. If any of you want to fight, you can come at me together. I, Dugu Wubai, will take all of you. Yi Guqin held his sword with both hands, his tone extremely cold. Although his injuries were not light, his physical body had a strong recovery ability, so he was able to hold on. Go! Shangguan Jingshan brandished his sword. Anyway, when Yin Ju joined the battle, he had already lost. If he lost, he would have to stay away from Mu Xingzu. But at least, Shangguan Jingshan didn't want Yi Guqin to win in the end. Yin Ju's expression was gloomy, and he also brandished his sword. With the two heavenly legends in the top 10 of the sword roll taking the lead, some of the heavenly legends who were originally afraid also became restless. Let's go too. Yin Lin and Yin Su also participated in the 5 academies competition. When they saw Yin Ju make a move, they also couldn't hold back. Yin Lin and Yin Su immediately made a move. After that, some of the heavenly legends from Tensei College, Sun Moon College, and Long River College also made a move. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 heavenly legends, led by Shangguan Jingshan and Yin Ju, rushed toward Yi Guqin. Shameless! In the stands, Zimo scolded, her face livid with anger. Especially when she saw that Yin Lin and Yin Su wanted to fish in troubled waters and attack Yi Guqin, she was even more furious. The expressions of Mu Xingzhu and the others were also very cold. But because it was one man can hold thousands, they couldn't help Yi Guqin. In the face of the siege of a group of heavenly legends, Yi Guqin looked calm. A breeze blew, blowing his black hair. At this moment, everyone was watching. Everyone was staring at Yi Guqin, wondering how he would solve the crisis. Yi Guqin held the 9-dragon thunder prison in one hand and slowly pointed to the sky. In the clouds, endless thunder rumbled. Godly sword thunder control technique, the ultimate move, God annihilation. Heavenly punishment. Yi Guqin poured his true qi into the 9-dragon thunder prison. The 9-dragon thunder prison suddenly shook, letting out an earth-shattering sword cry. In the clouds of the 9th heaven, rolling thunder poured down like a tide. That tide of thunder was like the end of the world. This move was the ultimate move of the godly sword thunder control technique, God annihilation heavenly punishment. Brilliant heavenly power, guided by the sword. Strictly speaking, the power of this sword move was no longer the power of Yi Guqin's own sword move. It borrowed the power of the heavenly thunder. So the power of this sword move could be imagined. With the guidance of the 9-dragon thunder prison, endless thunder swept toward Shangguan Jingshan and Yin Ju, as well as the group of heavenly legends. Oh no! Yin Lin was so scared that her face turned pale. But it was too late for her to retreat. Yin Su was the same, his expression changed dramatically. Shangguan Jingshan and the others might be able to resist this powerful move, but the heavenly legends on the heaven and earth spiritual bridge would not be able to withstand it. Burning flame sword way, heavenly flame stream. Shangguan Jingshan hurriedly swung his sword. 9 hell sword. Yin Ju's expression also changed. He did not expect Yi Guqin's move to be so powerful. Rumble. The rolling thunder waves spread out, and many screams could be heard from within. Blood spurted out from the mouths of the heavenly legends. Their bodies were charred black, and they were sent flying like kites with their strings cut. Yin Lin felt her delicate body go numb, and her snow-white skin was charred black. She was sent flying and smashed hard on the ground. She was in a very sorry state, and even her hair was charred by the electricity, emitting a burnt smell. Yin Su and the other heavenly legends were the same. Although this move did not take their lives, it almost took away half of their lives. Except for Shangguan Jingshan and Yin Ju, the rest of the heavenly legends who rushed up were all sent flying. They all collapsed on the ground, looking very miserable. Even Shangguan Jingshan and Yin Ju felt their blood boil in their chests, and electricity flowed on the surface of their skin from time to time. Silence, the surrounding area was dead silent. Yi Guqin's sword swept through the crowd. Looking at the heavenly legends lying on the ground and wailing in pain, the corners of the eyes of many warriors in the surrounding spectator stands twitched. They had never seen such a scene before. Hua Yuntao, Shangguan Bo, Yin Lingshan, and the other leaders' faces froze. Yi Guqin's move of drawing on the heaven's wrath had indeed caught them off guard. Who else? Yi Guqin wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with an indifferent expression. Although this god annihilation heavenly punishment was powerful, it also had a certain impact on the body. As soon as his words fell, the entire sword battle square was dead silent. Even Shangguan Jingshan and Yin Ju frowned and did not act rashly. Will Dugu Wubai really succeed? Oh my god, if so, then Dugu Wubai will be the first heavenly legend to successfully pass the one rider against 1,000 men mode. Tisk Tsk, first he passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, then he stepped into the sword catacomb. Is he going to win first place in the 5 academies competition? Many warriors sighed in their hearts. Just when the atmosphere was silent and everyone was looking forward to it. Finally, a slender figure slowly stepped out. Dugu Wubai, you are indeed very strong, but unfortunately, you met me. As soon as this voice came out, everyone's eyes lit up and endless expectations rose. Hua Wuxiu was finally going to make a move. Chapter 1014. Hua Wuxiu, the strongest heaven's pride of the Hua family. Third on the sword list. Third heaven of the divine dwelling realm. 7th class heaven's pride, with the sacred light and darkness constitution, and 2-sword Daos. All kinds of legends were added to his body, causing him to be covered in a layer of dazzling halo. It could be said that Hua Wuxiu was one of the most famous heaven's prides of the Sword Dynasty. Some people thought that his strength was enough to compete for the position of Jiankui. What was even more commendable was that although Hua Wuxiu had the halo of a heaven's pride, he was neither arrogant nor rash. This could be seen from the fact that he did not attack Yi Guqin immediately. Hua Wuxiu was a person who could keep his composure and was very shrewd. It was only now that Yi Guqin had revealed his true strength that Hua Wuxiu decided to attack. He had absolute confidence in dealing with Yi Guqin. Hua Wuxiu, you finally can't hold back anymore. Yi Guqin's gaze stopped on Hua Wuxiu. His position was destined to be on the opposite side of Hua Wuxiu. Dugu Wubai, your strength is indeed beyond everyone's expectations. I didn't expect you to have 3-sword Daos, but, if you think that you can defeat all the heaven's prides of the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty, then you're a little arrogant. Hua Wuxiu put his hands behind his back, his expression calm. I'm not being arrogant, but the truth. Yi Guqin retorted. Well, I'll let you see what the truth is. Hua Wuxiu slowly raised his hand, and a long sword as blazing as the sun fell into his hand. It was the sword of light of the twin swords of light and shadow. They're going to attack. Are they finally going to start the final collision? The entire sword battle square, and even the entire Sword Emperor city, was now the focus of attention. If Yi Guqin wanted to win the final 5 academies tournament, the biggest obstacle was naturally Hua Wuxiu. If Hua Wuxiu could defeat Yi Guqin, the championship would naturally fall to him. This battle could be said to be the most important battle to determine the champion of the 5 academies tournament. Everyone's heart was pounding. Wuxiu, you must destroy that little bastard. Hua Yuntao said coldly in his heart. The rest of the pseudo-saint families were also unwilling to see Yi Guqin win. On the other side, people from Tianxian College and Sacred Cliff College were praying for Yi Guqin. "Brother Yi, you must win." Saber 9 mumbled to himself in the sky. If Yi Guqin could win the championship, it would be a great boost to the itinerant cultivators. Even in the future battle for the Sword Sun, it would be of great benefit. In the Sword Dynasty, I haven't really had a hearty battle. Hua Wuxiu, do you have the ability? Yi Guqin held the 9-dragon thunder prison, and the sound of his sword was pleasant to the sky. As you wish. Hua Wuxiu took a step forward, and his sword swept across the sky. His figure seemed to turn into a ray of light, rushing straight to the sky, and his sword was pointed at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's arm shook, and the sound of his sword was like the roar of a dragon, shaking the sky. Rumble. Dark clouds rolled in the sky, and thunder shook the world. Torrential rain fell from the sky. It was as if they were witnessing the ultimate duel between the two swordsmen. The two figures collided directly, and a loud clang sounded, as if hundreds of millions of divine weapons were clashing. The entire Sword Emperor city was enveloped by this extremely loud collision. Everyone could hear the ear-shattering trembling sound in their ears. Clang! 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 Sword shadows were everywhere, and sword chi soared into the sky. The two people instantly clashed in the sky. The sword edge cut through the rain, as if splitting the curtain of rain in half. Sword of light, daybreak. Hua Wuxiu's sword swept out. The blazing sword light was like the light of daybreak, and with incomparably sharp sword chi, it pierced towards Yi Guqin's chest. Divine sword lightning controlling art, myriad lightning transformations. Yi Guqin's sword vibrated, and 9-colored lightning burst out from the sword, as if it had turned into thousands of lightning snakes, and swept out. Rumble. Lightning illuminated the sky, and sword light illuminated the world. Hua Wuxiu's body shook, and the aura of the third layer of the divine dwelling completely erupted. Powerful chi poured into the sword of light, and he slashed down at Yi Guqin. Sword of light, sunset. The mighty chi seemed to have turned into a magnificent sunset, but it also contained a fatal danger. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed, and he once again displayed the ultimate killing move of the divine sword lightning controlling art, divine thunder heaven summoning. The lightning in the sky fused with 9-colored lightning, and it swept out with a loud rumble. Boom! In this extreme collision, Yi Guqin's figure was blasted back hundreds of feet, and a sword wound so deep that bone could be seen appeared on his shoulder. Dugu Wubai is injured, some people exclaimed. Dugu Wubai is at a disadvantage because of his cultivation level, and coupled with the previous consumption, it's normal that he can't beat Hua Wuxiu, some experts analyzed. Indeed, in everyone's view, Yi Guqin's ability to compete with the heaven prides of the divine dwelling stage with Tiandi Lingxiao's strength was already amazing enough. But against Hua Wuxiu, who was at the third layer of the divine dwelling stage, it was still a little difficult. The advantage in cultivation level, coupled with Yi Guqin's previous consumption, led to the current situation. Not good. On the Sacred Cliff College side, Bei Xian Elder and the others had ugly expressions. Although they knew that Yi Guqin's chances of successfully passing the 1-man against 1,000 men challenge were very slim. But there was still a glimmer of hope in their hearts, and they hoped that a miracle would happen. But it seemed that the situation was not good for Yi Guqin. Master. Mu Xingzu's heart was also in her mouth. But unlike the others, Mu Xingzu had absolute faith in Yi Guqin. After all, her master was someone who had fought a bloody battle with Dihaoyan. Although Hua Wuxiu was not weak, there was still a big gap between him and Dihaoyan. Yi Guqin was not even afraid of Dihaoyan, so how could he be afraid of Hua Wuxiu? Come on, master. Mu Xingzu opened her small mouth and shouted desperately. Ha, so what if you shout? Against Hua Wuxiu, Dugu Wubai won't be able to turn the tables. Some of Yi Guqin's enemies sneered. Boom! 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 The collision in the sky continued. Yi Guqin's figure was knocked back again and again, and blood flowed out of his mouth. On the other hand, Hua Wuxiu was much calmer. "Dugu Wubai, is this your strength?" Hua Wuxiu's face was calm, and there was a trace of disappointment. Hearing this, many Sacred Cliff College disciples clenched their fists. In their view, if Yi Guqin had not fought with Shengguan Jingshan and the others, he would not have been suppressed. "Ha! Hua Wuxiu, is this your strength?" Yi Guqin's face did not show the slightest frustration. Instead, his eyes were deep. Hua Wuxiu felt that something was wrong. But a moment later, Hua Wuxiu frowned slightly. "Are you measuring my strength?" Hua Wuxiu said coldly. "What do you think?" Yi Guqin's lips curved into a sneer. Indeed, from an outsider's point of view, Yi Guqin was in a state of being suppressed. But his real intention was to use this to measure Hua Wuxiu's true strength, as well as the increase in combat power brought about by his third layer of the divine dwelling realm. And now, Yi Guqin had a better understanding of Hua Wuxiu's strength. So next. "Hua Wuxiu, the show has just begun." Yi Guqin suddenly made a hand seal. A terrifying devouring force was released from his body. In an instant, the sky changed color. Yi Guqin seemed to have turned into the eye of the storm, and the surrounding spiritual qi was all absorbed by him. The heaven-devouring secret technique, erupt. Chapter 10-15. The sky-devouring secret art, as one of the top 10 ancient secret arts, had always been Yi Guqin's trump card. It was also his best method to make up for his lack of cultivation level. Although Yi Guqin had not completely mastered the sky-devouring secret art, he had at least reached the first level. The first level could ignore the bottleneck of one's cultivation level and allow Yi Guqin's power to soar by 3 cultivation levels. At this moment, Yi Guqin displayed the sky-devouring secret art, as if he had become the center of the world. An endless amount of spiritual energy was absorbed by it. "What kind of secret art is that?" "I don't know. Dugu Wubai still has such a method." All the cultivators present were shocked by Yi Guqin's method. Hua Wuxiu also revealed a look of surprise, and then his face darkened. In the perception of everyone present, Yi Guqin's cultivation level soared. 8th level of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. 9th level of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. Divine Dwelling Stage. Boom! When Yi Guqin's aura broke through to the divine dwelling stage, the surrounding space rippled. Yi Guqin held the 9-dragon thunder prison in his hand, his black hair fluttering in the wind. He was like a divine king that had undergone nirvana, and his pressure was astonishing. With the power of the sky-devouring secret art, Yi Guqin's cultivation soared to the divine dwelling stage. Although at this moment, he had not formed a divine dwelling in his dantian. But in terms of the density of his qi and cultivation alone, he was comparable to a divine dwelling expert. How is this possible? What kind of secret art can make Dugu Wubai's strength break through to the divine dwelling stage? Many people were stunned. Shengguan Jingshan, Ouyang Fengyun, Yin Zhu, and the others trembled. They did not expect Yi Guqin to have such a trump card. If he had used it just now, Shengguan Jingshan and the others might not have been suppressed, but at least they wouldn't have had any advantage. So he was holding back when he was fighting me. Shengguan Jingshan gritted his teeth, feeling a sense of humiliation and frustration in his heart. In Yi Guqin's eyes, Shengguan Jingshan was not qualified enough for him to go all out. Only an opponent like Hua Wuxiu deserved to go all out. Yi Guqin's aura erupted like a volcano. A power that he had never felt before flowed through his body. Is this the power of the divine dwelling stage? Yi Guqin muttered. He finally understood why Heaven and Earth Bridge Heaven Prides were no match for divine dwelling Heaven Prides. The difference in the quality and density of his Jinqi was simply too great. If Yi Guqin hadn't relied on his perfect physical body, the limit of his sea of qi, and other means, he wouldn't have been able to fight against an expert of the divine dwelling stage. But now, after using the sky-devouring secret technique, the gap between Yi Guqin and Hua Wuxiu had shrunk a lot. Hua Wuxiu, let's fight again. Yi Guqin took a step forward, and his figure flashed directly in front of Hua Wuxiu as if he had teleported. The same sword swept out, but the power was more than twice as strong as before. So you still have such a trump card? Hua Wuxiu's expression also turned a little serious. He thought that Yi Guqin had already used all his trump cards in the battle with Shangguan Jingshan and the others. Who would have thought that Yi Guqin was still holding back? But Hua Wuxiu was a top heaven pride after all, and he wouldn't be so easily swayed. He drew his sword again and fought with Yi Guqin. In this collision, Yi Guqin's disadvantage was obviously much less. Although there was still a gap of 3 small realms between him and Hua Wuxiu, with the help of his perfect physical body, the limit of his sea of qi, and other means, he wasn't much weaker than Hua Wuxiu. Hateful. On the Hua family's side, Hua Yuntao's eyes were gloomy. He thought that Hua Wuxiu would be able to achieve a decisive victory, but who would have thought there would be such an unforeseen event? On the Sacred Cliff College's side, many disciples breathed a sigh of relief. But at the moment, Hua Wuxiu still had a slight advantage. In everyone's view, Yi Guqin's situation wasn't optimistic. Dugu Wubai, you've really hidden your strength well, but it's time to end it, Hua Wuxiu said indifferently. He didn't want to drag it out with Yi Guqin for too long, and he wanted to achieve a crushing victory. Only in this way could Hua Wuxiu shatter the halo of a saint. Bright sword technique, unhindered. Hua Wuxiu stabbed out with his sword, and as the sword qi gushed out, it seemed to turn into an illusory chessboard in the void. Hua Wuxiu has finally begun to show his true strength. Seeing this scene, many warriors couldn't help but exclaim. Hua Wuxiu's Go Dao was as famous as his sword Dao. He had the sacred body of light and darkness, and Go was also a black and white game, so the two were compatible. Therefore, Hua Wuxiu liked to play Go since he was young, and he even integrated Go Dao into Sword Dao. This bright sword technique was the perfect fusion of Go Dao and Sword Dao. In an instant, Yi Guqin felt that the surrounding void seemed to be sealed by the unhindered sword qi. The sky is divided into yin and yang, and Go is divided into black and white. Unhindered and unhindered, only I am unparalleled. As Hua Wuxiu's sword vibrated, black and white chess pieces appeared in the void and slashed at Yi Guqin. Interesting. Not only was there no fear in Yi Guqin's eyes, but there was also excitement. Such a strange sword technique was indeed rare. Star-breaking sword of absolute destruction. Yi Guqin pointed his sword and collided with the sword qi of the chess pieces. However, the chess pieces in the surrounding void moved continuously, draining Yi Guqin's spiritual qi. Dugu Wubai, you don't have to waste your energy. My bright sword technique has integrated Go Dao, and is not just a sword technique. Hua Wuxiu's lips curled into a faint smile. He was extremely confident in his Go Dao. Is that so? Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. It wasn't that he didn't know how to play Go. In his previous life, when he was the sword demon, he sat cross-legged on a lonely peak for more than 10 years. Other than talking to the divine condor, he often played Go with himself. Although Yi Guqin didn't specialize in Go Dao, it didn't mean that he didn't know how to play. Thinking of this, Yi Guqin's chaotic sea of consciousness turned, and his mind was shaken. In an instant, his eyes shone. Dragon sword, come. Yi Guqin's soul power spread out and summoned the dragon sword in the void. The dragon sword roared and swooped down. The true dragon formed by thousands of ancient swords broke through the Go Dao in the void. Humph. Bright sword technique, Tianyuan. Hua Wuxiu snorted coldly and changed his sword momentum. He pointed his sword and fixed Tianyuan. Tianyuan was the center of the Go Dao, and a sword could decide the whole game. This sword was aimed directly at Yi Guqin. Sword of absolute destruction. Yi Guqin raised his sword, and a blazing sword light soared into the sky and collided with Hua Wuxiu's sword of Tianyuan. The void exploded, and endless waves of sword qi swept through the surrounding space. Bright sword technique, dragon slaying. Hua Wuxiu activated his vigorous spiritual qi, and a 100-meter-long black and white sword qi appeared in the void, and a fierce sword qi pressure spread out. In the Go Dao, there was a saying about dragon slaying. At this moment, Hua Wuxiu integrated this move into his sword Dao. The 100-meter-long black and white sword light swept toward Yiguchen's dragon sword. "Can you kill this dragon of mine?" Yiguchen shouted coldly, and his spiritual qi also erupted. He performed the Sword of Absolute Destruction and the Sword of Absolute Destruction. Third Ultimate Holy Sword, Annihilation of Heaven and Earth. Yiguchen's sword cut through the air, and it was as if heaven and earth were turned upside down, and the universe was destroyed. The two ultimate moves collided, and the waves shook the world. Chapter 10:16. Heaven and Earth Annihilation was the strongest move of the three ultimate holy swords, second only to the combination of the three moves. Hua Wuxiu's dragon-slaying sword was also the strongest move of the bright sword technique. Between the two, strong moves collided like meteors colliding and dragons colliding. Endless ripples of sword qi burst out, causing the surrounding space to tremble endlessly. After the collision, both of them were shaken back. Yiguchen's chest tightened, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth again. Hua Wuxiu was ranked third on the sword ranking, and his strength was indeed not weak. Even with Yiguchen's physical body, he was still injured in the collision. On the other side, Hua Wuxiu seemed to be uninjured, but the web between his thumb and index finger where he held the sword was split open, and blood dripped down. However, compared to Yiguchen, he was still slightly better. Looking at the situation, the Hua family and other pseudo-saint families smiled. Obviously, they thought that it was only a matter of time before Yiguchen's defeat. "Dugu Wubai, you are just a chess piece on my chessboard." Hua Wuxiu looked calm. He took a step forward, and light flashed around him. His whole body seemed to have transformed into endless light shadows, and he flashed toward Yiguchen. It's Hua Wuxiu's royal-level body movement, light and shadow follower. Many warriors widened their eyes. Royal-level body movement was extremely rare, even rarer than swordsmanship martial arts. Hua Wuxiu used light and shadow follower, and his body was extremely fast, like a beam of light. Not only that, but countless illusions also appeared around his body. Every shadow was no different from Hua Wuxiu, and even their auras were exactly the same. Obviously, they had a strong confusing effect. Bright sword technique, yin and yang. Hua Wuxiu used bright sword technique again while using his body movement. In the face of Hua Wuxiu's aggressive attack, Yiguchen's chaotic sea of consciousness operated in his mind. His powerful spiritual perception spread out, trying to distinguish between the real body and the phantom. But to Yiguchen's surprise, each of Hua Wuxiu's phantoms looked no different from the real thing. If it could be seen through so easily, then it would be a shame for its emperor-class movement technique. Hua Wuxiu smiled faintly. Then, the sound of swords clashing could be heard. Yiguchen continued to wield his sword to block Hua Wuxiu's attacks. It's over. Dugu Wubai is at a complete disadvantage now. Some of the loose cultivators revealed dejected looks. At this moment, Yiguchen used wave-like subtle steps. His figure was like a willow in the wind, or like duckweed floating in the water. At the same time, a surge of sword concept erupted from within his body. Gravity sword domain, go. Yiguchen used the sword domain of the edgeless sword principle. In the void, the primordial sacred mountain appeared, and a heavy pressure spread out to the surrounding void. Even Hua Wuxiu was affected, and his movement technique slowed down. 10,000 waves of the void. Yiguchen used the ultimate move of the Great Void Sword Wave again. The sword wave could ignore most defenses. Hua Wuxiu was caught off guard, and his figure was knocked back. The surrounding phantoms disappeared in an instant. The sudden reversal of the battle situation was also unexpected to everyone. Even Hua Yuntao's expression changed slightly. Sword principle domain. Hua Wuxiu murmured. His eyes seemed to be emitting endless light. Vigorous sword qi surged out of his body, and immediately turned into a radiant domain. Hua Wuxiu stood in the middle, like a golden divine king, releasing endless light. This was Komio Kendo's sword domain, the radiant sword domain. He finally used the sword principle domain. Hua Wuxiu has the light and darkness sacred body. The radiant sword domain he released is even stronger than Hua Shengjie's. Some of the Hua family disciples clenched their fists and said. Hua Shengjie also had the Komyo Kendo, and he had used it before. But now, the radiant sword domain that Hua Wuxiu released was several times stronger than Hua Shengjie's. Half the sky seemed to be illuminated by the golden light. I am the light. Hua Wuxiu raised his sword. In the radiant sword domain, light swords condensed one after another. In the end, there were thousands of light swords surrounding him. Suppress. As Hua Wuxiu finished speaking, the light swords rushed toward Yiguchen. Godly sword lightning manipulation art, divine annihilation heavenly punishment. In the face of Hua Wuxiu's powerful move, Yiguchen would not underestimate it. He directly used the godly sword lightning manipulation art's ultimate move. The sword pointed to the sky, and endless thunder roared, turning into a thunder tide that spread down. Rumble. The destructive thunder tide collided with the endless light swords, and a violent roar burst forth. Radiant sword domain, 10,000 sword salvation. Hua Wuxiu used his powerful move again. He raised his hand, and the radiant sword domain condensed into 10,000 golden light swords again, and continued to rush toward Yiguchen. Yiguchen's eyes were suddenly swallowed by the color of blood, and turned into the eyes of Azura. Endless bloody and murderous aura surged out of Yiguchen's body. He seemed to have turned into a demon in the sword, killing the sky with his blood. Azura blood C18 layers, suppress. Yiguchen and Hua Wuxiu confronted each other head-on, unwilling to retreat at all. Sword chi turned into a blood tide, and the 18 layers of blood prison were like bloody meteors, smashing into Hua Wuxiu's radiant sword domain. Rumble. The two sword Dao domains collided, and the rain in the sky seemed to be scattered. Hua Wuxiu's Komyo Kendo was ordinary, but it was not weaker than the exceptional sword Dao. With the support of the sacred light and darkness constitution, Hua Wuxiu's light and darkness sword Dao were even stronger than ordinary exceptional sword Dao. However, Yiguchen's Azura sword Dao was also an exceptional sword Dao, and it was an existence that focused on killing. Its lethality was needless to say. Pfft! In such a violent collision, both of them spat out blood. Especially Hua Wuxiu, who had been incomparably calm before, but now there was blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. Wuxiu. Hua Yuntao and the other members of the Hua family all looked solemn. It was rare for them to see Hua Wuxiu injured, let alone bleeding. In their view, the number of the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty who were qualified to injure Hua Wuxiu could be counted on one hand. Hua Wuxiu raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Looking at the bloodstains on his palm, Hua Wuxiu's expression slowly sank. What he needed was to defeat Yiguchen in front of everyone in the 5 Academies tournament. Not to be caught in a difficult battle like this. Yiguchen, you have angered me. Hua Wuxiu's eyes were cold. He had always been calm, but now, he was really infuriated by Yiguchen. Hua Wuxiu, whatever means you have, just use them. Yiguchen was also injured, and there was a little blood on his chin. Well, then I'll let you see the real power of the divine light and darkness body, a 7th-class genius talent. Hua Wuxiu's tone was cold. On the surface of his body, streaks of golden runes spread out, carrying with them endless golden runes. Hua Wuxiu's long hair was scattered, and every strand seemed to have turned golden. Hua Wuxiu's whole person seemed to have incarnated into the god of light, and his aura was extremely strong. Divine light and darkness body, light form. Hua Wuxiu lashed out with his sword again. The reddish-gold sword radiance seemed to cut through the void as it rushed towards Yiguchen. What a strong power! Yiguchen's expression suddenly froze. He blocked in front of him with the 9-dragon thunder prison, and with a loud bang, Yiguchen's figure was fiercely knocked back. Chapter 1017. Yiguchen had previously estimated Hua Wuxiu's strength. But now, Hua Wuxiu's strength was far beyond Yiguchen's expectations, so he was forced to retreat. When they saw Hua Wuxiu, with his golden hair fluttering in the wind and his body branded with golden runes, everyone was shocked. The gazes of all 500,000 martial artists were fixed on him. There was an indescribable shock on their faces. Is this Hua Wuxiu's divine ability, the divine body of light and darkness? This is the first time I've seen it. The divine ability of a 7th-grade genius is indeed powerful. Many martial artists stared at Hua Wuxiu without blinking. Talent was innate, and ordinary people could only envy it. I heard that Hua Wuxiu's divine body of light and darkness allows him to switch between the light form and the dark form, each with different emphasis. Some martial artists whispered to each other. I heard that Hua Wuxiu's divine body of light is supreme in terms of strength. He is unparalleled in terms of strength. Dugu Wubai is really in danger now. Many people sighed. Now that Hua Wuxiu had even used his divine ability, the scales of victory were undoubtedly tilted to his side. Ha! Killing a chicken with a sledgehammer. Hua Yuntao sneered and shook his head. Obviously, he thought that using the divine body of light and darkness to defeat Yi Guqin was a waste of talent. I knew it. How could Dugu Wubai be a match for Brother Hua? On the other side, Yushuang Yan, who had been seriously injured by Yi Guqin, looked at the golden figure in the sky with great admiration. As for Sacred Cliff College, the atmosphere was very gloomy. Hua Wuxiu's innate mystique brought about an immense amount of pressure. At this moment, even Elder Bei Xian and the others couldn't help but feel nervous. Facing Hua Wuxiu, who had taken on the form of light, Yi Guqin frowned slightly. He was also a 7th-rank prodigy and also had a special ability. He was not weaker than Hua Wuxiu. However, the Xiantian sword embryo was still a little too conspicuous. If he were to bring it out now, it would inevitably attract the attention of some people. Therefore, Yi Guqin did not intend to use his innate sword embryo. However, even if Yi Guqin couldn't use his innate sword embryo, he still had a way to deal with it. Dugu Wubai, it's over. Hua Wuxiu's eyes seemed to have turned golden as well. He held the sword of light in his hand and swept it towards Yi Guqin like a divine king. Yi Guqin also wielded his sword and went up to fight with Hua Wuxiu. With a loud clang, Yi Guqin's figure was knocked back again. Hua Wuxiu's current power was unstoppable. He was really like a primordial king. Is this the divine light and darkness constitution? It's really amazing. Yi Guqin thought to himself. The divine light and darkness constitution could allow Hua Wuxiu to switch between light and darkness. The light form was the supreme form of power. Then what was the darkness form? However, facing Hua Wuxiu's powerful attack, Yi Guqin could not stand still. Ancient God technique. Yi Guqin shouted coldly in his mind. 2 star imprints appeared between his eyebrows. Ancient God light patterns appeared under Yi Guqin's skin. His entire body grew to 9 feet tall, and his physical strength instantly increased by 8 times. Yi Guqin also transformed into his ancient God form. Hua Wuxiu, again. Yi Guqin's current aura was just as strong. He held his sword and clashed with Hua Wuxiu again. Immediately, Hua Wuxiu felt a strong force coming from the tip of the sword. At this moment, Yi Guqin's skyrocketing power even overpowered his light form. How is this possible? Hua Wuxiu's expression finally changed. Not only him, but all the cultivators present were also dumbfounded. They did not expect that Yi Guqin still had a trump card that could compete with Hua Wuxiu's light form. On the Hua family's side, the atmosphere was even more deathly silent. Hua Yuntao's face was twitching. Every time he thought that Hua Wuxiu could win, Yi Guqin would use another trump card. Dugu Wubai, how much more are you hiding? Even Hua Wuxiu could no longer keep calm. He thought that he had seen through Yi Guqin, but he realized that Yi Guqin could always surprise him. Radiant Sword Realm, Holy Light Sword. The light sword in Hua Wuxiu's hand rose into the air. Endless divine light gathered around it, and a golden giant sword that was 100 feet long appeared. Hua Wuxiu used his light form to activate the Radiant Sword Realm and Holy Light Sword. One could imagine the power of the superposition. The entire void seemed to be filled with divine light. The sword energy was like a tidal wave. Dugu Wubai, can you take this sword? Hua Wuxiu raised one hand and grabbed at the void. The holy light sword was grabbed by Hua Wuxiu and swept towards Yiguchen. The sky shook as the sword swept out. The thick layers of clouds were shattered. This was Hua Wuxiu's strongest move. Its power made all the heaven prides tremble in fear. They knew that they could not take Hua Wuxiu's move. Even Kenpo and the other sword sons of the unaffiliated cultivator camp were shocked by the power of this sword. Hua Wuxiu definitely has the strength to compete for the Jiankui. Kenpo's eyes were solemn. Hundreds of thousands of gazes gathered on the scene. Would Yi Guchen be able to withstand this sword? Yi Guchen's expression was calm in the face of Hua Wuxiu's ultimate move. The 100,000 feet qi si in his body was activated to the limit. True qi comparable to the divine dwelling stage gushed out and poured into the 9-dragon thunder prison. Star Breaker Sword. Yi Guchen's sword vibrated, and sword qi flowed like a river of stars. How can this move block Hua Wuxiu's killing move? Seeing Yi Guchen's action, many warriors shook their heads. But it was not over. Yi Guchen's sword power changed again, and a crescent-shaped sword light emerged again. Two swords combined. He has used this move before, and its power should not be comparable to Hua Wuxiu's, a sovereign muttered to himself. But this was not the end. Yi Guchen's expression hardened, and sword qi gushed out again. A blazing sword light appeared once again. The Qianyang sword of extinction was displayed. Could it be? Just as Yi Guchen unleashed all three moves, Han Lingxian's delicate body shook from the Divine Cliff Academy's side. Her eyes were filled with extreme disbelief as she looked at Yi Guchen. She also cultivated the three ultimate holy swords, so she naturally knew what move Yi Guchen was using. Could it be the three ultimate holy swords combined? Han Lingxian covered her red lips, and she was shocked. Combining two swords of the three ultimate holy swords was already very difficult. As for combining three swords, it was even more difficult. Even if Han Lingxian cultivated every day, she could only display the starry sun flowing fire, and she could not even display the universal extermination. But Yi Guchen was going to display the three ultimate holy swords combined. How could Han Lingxian not be shocked? In the sky, Yi Guchen displayed the three ultimate holy swords at the same time, and the three sword lights froze in the void. Yi Guchen's expression was cold, and his breath condensed as he spoke slowly. Star Breaker, Earth Moon, Qianyang, three ultimate holy swords combined. Moon falling star sinking vast yang break. Yi Guchen pointed his sword at the sky, and the three sword lights combined into one, turning into an extremely sharp sword light. This was the three ultimate holy swords combined, the ultimate move. Chapter 1018. As an emperor-level sword technique, the ultimate move of the three ultimate holy swords was undoubtedly powerful. As Yi Guchen swung his sword, the sword radiance condensed and the surroundings showed an astonishing scene of the falling moon, the dying stars, and the shattering of the sun. Such an astonishing phenomenon and fluctuation once again silenced the hundreds of thousands of warriors around the sword battle square. Their throats seemed to be blocked. The fluctuation of the move that Yi Guchen displayed at this moment was not weaker than Hua Wuxiu's sword move at all. Their sword moves collided in the void. Boom! What followed was an earth-shattering clanging sound. The fluctuation that swept out destroyed the clouds in the sky. Rumble! The billowing waves of sword qi spread out, and even a few false saints had to take action to block the sword qi fluctuation. In the center of the collision, it was as if a nuclear bomb had exploded. Dazzling flames and divine light burst out. Hundreds of thousands of eyes stared at the center without blinking. In particular, the people of Sacred Cliff College and the Hua family were nervous. Cough. In this collision, the sound of coughing blood was suddenly heard. Yi Guchen's figure was seen to be thrown back 100 feet. A deep wound appeared on his chest, and blood dripped down. Defeated, Dugu Wubai is finally defeated. Seeing Yi Guchen's appearance, many people in the audience exclaimed. In particular, the people of the Hua family were shouting excitedly. Yi Guqin's opponents, Yu Shuangyan, Hua Xingjie, Ouyang Tianji, and the others, were also full of joy. However, before the joy on their faces could spread completely, on the other side, Hua Wuxiu's figure was also revealed. He was also blasted back. There was a huge wound on his body, and blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth. The joy on the faces of the people of the Hua family was completely frozen. Even Yu Shuangyan, who worshipped Hua Wuxiu to the extreme, was extremely pale. She shook her head, and her face was full of disbelief. All the noise in the audience fell silent in an instant. They had never seen Hua Wuxiu in such a sorry state. His clothes were dyed red and dripping with blood. It could be said that in the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty, there were not many people who could make Hua Wuxiu in such a sorry state. Yi Guqin was one of them. This time, even Hua Yintao's face was extremely cold. He wanted Hua Wuxiu to cripple Yi Guqin, but in the end, the two were evenly matched. On the other side, Jian Mr., First Elder Imei, Elder Bei Xian, and the others heaved a sigh of relief. Good, very good. Dugu Wubai, it seems that I have been wrong about you all this time. Hua Wuxiu's voice was cold, and no emotion could be heard. He no longer underestimated Yi Guqin. But who would have thought that Hua Wuxiu still greatly underestimated Yi Guqin's strength? In that case, I will show you my true strength. Dugu Wubai, can you really not lose? Hua Wuxiu's lips curled into a cold smile. He flipped his other hand, and a long sword as black as ink appeared in his hand again. When they saw this sword, many warriors could not help but widen their eyes. They said in shock, "The Sword of Shadow." Hua Wuxiu took out the Sword of Light and Shadow at the same time. It means that he is serious. Hua Wuxiu's forte was also dual swords. Under normal circumstances, Hua Wuxiu would at most use the Sword of Light against ordinary opponents. When he used both the Sword of Light and Shadow at the same time, it was the time when Hua Wuxiu would really use his full strength. Sword of Shadow, Curtain of Night. Hua Wuxiu rushed forward and slashed with his sword again. Wherever the sword light passed, it seemed to have turned into a pitch-black curtain of night. Yi Guqin was not to be outdone. He attacked again. The two of them turned into afterimages and collided with each other. Parallel light and shadow. Hua Wuxiu held the Sword of Shadow in his left hand and the Sword of Light in his right. They swept towards Yi Guqin at the same time. Seeing this, Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and the others were very nervous. Under normal circumstances, a two-handed sword would have an absolute advantage over a one-handed sword. Ling Mo-shu was relieved when he saw this. He looked at the nervous Ling Moyin and said, "Don't worry, Brother Dugu won't lose to Hua Wuxiu when it comes to two-handed swords." Really? Ling Moyin bit her lips, her eyes still filled with worry. Seeing Ling Moyin's expression, Ling Mo-shu could not help but ask, "Little Yin, could it be that you like Brother Dugu?" "No, no." Ling Moyin's face turned red and she stammered. At this time, the battle in the sky was also very intense. Yi Guqin flipped his hand and the mystical rune weapon landed in his hand. Yi Guqin held the Nine-Dragon Thunder Prison in one hand and the mystical rune weapon in the other as he fought with Hua Wuxiu again. What shocked everyone was that Yi Guqin's two-handed sword was not weaker than Hua Wuxiu's at all. In fact, it felt like it was even stronger. The degree of smoothness made Hua Wuxiu pale in comparison. "Dugu Wubai, you." Hua Wuxiu could not hide the astonishment in his eyes. After all, Yi Guqin had never used his two-handed swords in public in the Sword Dynasty. Therefore, when he used it now, it definitely stunned everyone, including Hua Wuxiu. "Hua Wuxiu, you're not the only one who knows how to use two-handed swords." Yi Guqin smiled. He used the Void Destruction with his left hand and the Universe Annihilation with his right. Two powerful moves were blasted towards Hua Wuxiu. Sword of Light, Sunset Glow, Sword of Shadow, Shadow Blade. Hua Wuxiu also used his two-handed sword moves. The speed of their swords was extremely fast. Ordinary heaven and earth spiritual bridge prodigies could not even see clearly. Boom! 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 The chaotic collisions were extremely intense. Hua Wuxiu and Yi Guqin also had wounds on their bodies. However, what surprised everyone the most was that Yi Guqin's vital energy did not show any signs of exhaustion after such a long battle. This was naturally attributed to Yi Guqin's ultimate sea of qi. Hua Wuxiu also noticed this and his expression turned serious. It was impossible for him to exhaust Yi Guqin's real qi to achieve victory. If that's the case. Hua Wuxiu's expression turned cold. He no longer held back. His body shook, and waves of strange power spread out again. What trick is Hua Wuxiu playing now? Yi Guqin's eyes focused. Sacred body of light and darkness, dark form. Dark air currents surged around Hua Wuxiu's body. His long hair, which was dyed golden, turned pitch black in an instant. His eyes, which were overflowing with divine light, also became as dark and deep as a black hole. The divine light around him dissipated and turned into a violent pitch-black air current. Hua Wuxiu's sacred body of light and darkness switched from the light form to the dark form. It's the dark form. It's rumored that Hua Wuxiu's dark form is extremely fast and strange. It's very different from the light form. Some people exclaimed. The moment Hua Wuxiu switched to the dark form, his speed suddenly increased by several times. His body almost turned into a pitch-black shadow as he rapidly attacked Yi Guqin with his sword. That speed made Yi Guqin's heart tremble slightly. Chapter 10:19. Hua Wuxiu's dark form was extremely fast. This kind of extreme speed was not just in terms of speed. In terms of sword speed, it was also extremely fast. Dark Night 18 slashes. At this moment, Hua Wuxiu's voice was deep and cold. His entire body seemed to have turned into a shadow that blended into the void. The two swords moved quickly and slashed out 18 times. Even Yi Guqin was caught off guard and could only block with the 9-dragon thunder prison. Puchi, sword wounds appeared on Yi Guqin's body. Although Yi Guqin had blocked most of Hua Wuxiu's sword moves, the extreme speed of the attack still caused many wounds to appear on Yi Guqin's body. So close, yet so far. Yi Guqin once again used so close, yet so far, yet so far. However, he still could not catch up with Hua Wuxiu's speed. As expected of a grade 7 Heaven's Pride talent. Yi Guqin sighed in his heart. None of the innate divine abilities were simple. Hua Wuxiu naturally had his reasons for being able to rank third on the sword list. The power of the light form was supreme. The extreme speed of the dark form was supreme. This made Hua Wuxiu almost invincible. There should be a result soon, right? Some warriors muttered as they looked at Yi Guqin, who was being suppressed. Yi Guqin's speed was actually not slow. However, compared to Hua Wuxiu's dark form, he was still slightly slower. Gravity Sword Realm. Yi Guqin once again used the sword realm of the edgeless sword principle. In the void, the shadow of the immemorial sacred mountain appeared. A strong gravitational force pressed down on Yi Guqin from all directions. Hua Wuxiu's figure was naturally affected and slowed down a little. At this moment, Hua Wuxiu snorted coldly. Sword chi fluctuations erupted from his body again. Endless dark sword light spread out from his body. Dark Sword Dao, Eternal Night Sword Domain. Around Hua Wuxiu, a Dark Sword Wei domain spread out. It was the sword domain of the Dark Sword Wei, the Eternal Night Sword Domain. The power of this sword domain directly counteracted the pressure of the Gravity Sword Domain. Not only that, but it also included Yi Guqin. In an instant, everything around Yi Guqin disappeared. All that was left was dead silence and darkness, as if he was in the depths of the cold and dark universe. To the onlookers, Yi Guqin's figure was submerged in a pitch-black sword domain. Oh no! Bei Xian Elder and the others raised their eyebrows and looked anxious. Hua Wuxiu's Eternal Night Sword Domain was very strange. If one was sucked into it, it would be like a fish that had fallen into a net, and it would be very difficult to escape. Not only that, within the Eternal Night Sword Domain, all senses, vision, hearing, touch, and so on would be suppressed to the limit. However, Hua Wuxiu, who was in his dark form, was not affected at all. In fact, he could even be strengthened. Ha! Little bastard, this is the result of going against the Hua family. Hua Yuntao sneered in his heart. In his opinion, since Yi Guqin had fallen into the Eternal Night Sword domain, he was a piece of meat that Hua Wuxiu could do whatever he wanted to him. Wasn't it easy to destroy Yi Guqin? Senior brother Dugu is in danger. Zimo's face was also filled with anxiety. Sigh. Suki Miyazaki shook her head slightly. Although most people did not think that Yi Guqin could succeed, there were still some people who still had a glimmer of hope. Now, this glimmer of hope was about to be extinguished. Within the Eternal Night Sword domain, Yi Guqin waited with rapt attention. He realized that his 5 senses had been suppressed to the extreme. Whoosh! At this moment, a sword gleam suddenly pierced toward Yi Guqin's chest. Yi Guqin blocked with his sword. Soon, another pitch-black sword gleam appeared. Then, streaks of pitch-black sword gleams burst out from the depths of the darkness. Yi Guqin blocked with his sword, adding a few more wounds to his body. Ha! Dugu Wubai, after falling into the Eternal Night Sword domain, you are a fish on the chopping block. Perhaps it will be easier for you if you surrender. In the darkness, Hua Wuxiu's voice sounded. In this world, the one who can make me, Dugu Wubai, surrender has yet to be born. Yi Guqin's eyes were completely swallowed by the color of blood. He used the Eye of Azura. The Eye of Azura could slow down the opponent's movements and observe them. Is that so? Then I have no choice but to cripple you. It's a pity that I finally met an opponent, but you are standing on the opposite side of the Hua family. In the darkness, Hua Wuxiu's sigh sounded. 1,000 shadow swords. In the dark void, Hua Wuxiu's voice was cold. The space rustled. Then, countless pitch-black sword auras rushed toward Yi Guqin from all directions. That momentum was as if they wanted to pierce Yi Guqin into a sieve. Although killing was not allowed in the 5 Academies tournament. However, this move was enough to seriously injure Yi Guqin and completely cripple him. In the face of such an extreme move, Yi Guqin's mentality was extremely calm. He raised one hand, and a 5-colored divine light burst out from Yi Guqin's body. It was 5 sword array, and there were many 5-colored array patterns spreading in the surrounding void. This was a move that Yi Guqin had not used for a long time, the 5 Emperors Cosmos Sword Formation. The 5 Emperors Cosmos Sword Formation was an Earth-level formation. Even now, its power was definitely not weak. In the past, Yi Guqin could not fully exert the power of the 5 Emperors Cosmos Sword Formation. But now, Yi Guqin, who had relied on the sky-devouring secret technique to increase his strength to the divine dwelling stage, was able to activate the true power of the Earth-level low-grade sword formation. At the same time that Yi Guqin brought out the formation, Emperor Jin, Emperor Qing, Emperor Black, Emperor Scarlet, and Emperor Yellow transformed into the 5 formation spirits of the Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, Black Tortoise, and Ting Snake. This is an Earth-level formation. In the darkness, Hua Wuxiu's voice sounded surprised again. The sword auras that burst out from the depths of the darkness were all blocked by the 5 formation spirits. Yi Guqin stood in the middle of the formation, motionless. Hua Wuxiu, what other tricks do you have? Show them all. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. At this moment, a shadow suddenly emerged from behind Yi Guqin. It was Hua Wuxiu in his dark form, holding a sword and stabbing at Yi Guqin's back. I was waiting for you to appear. Yi Guqin's lips curved in a cold smile. Although his 5 senses were suppressed, Yi Guqin's knowledge C was a special chaotic knowledge C. Although the Eternal Night Sword domain could suppress soul perception, it could only suppress the perception of ordinary knowledge C. Yi Guqin's knowledge C was a special chaotic knowledge C, so his soul perception was not weakened by much. Dugu 9 Swords, Breaking Sword Style. Yi Guqin raised the 9 Dragon Thunder Prison, and terrifying sword aura gushed out as if it could pierce through everything. Not good. Hua Wuxiu's expression turned serious. He did not expect that Yi Guqin's soul perception would not be suppressed by the eternal night sword domain. But now, it was too late to retreat. Dark Emperor's sword. Hua Wuxiu swept his sword, and a shadow of the Dark Emperor appeared behind him, and a pitch-black sword radiance burst out. Breaking sword style, breaking all techniques. Yi Guqin was not afraid, and clashed with Hua Wuxiu's sword. There was a loud bang, as if heaven and earth were being split open, and a ray of light appeared. The breaking sword style was breaking all techniques. At this moment, when it defeated Hua Wuxiu, it also broke the shackles of the eternal night sword domain. At the same time, everyone outside saw that the pitch-black knowledge sea seemed to be collapsing. Is it finally over? Looks like Wuxiu has already crippled that beast. Hua Yuntao's face was filled with joy. Chapter 1020. At this moment, everyone in the sword battle square was staring at the dark domain. Cracks appeared one after another, showing signs of collapsing. However, the Hua family members did not look worried at all. Instead, they looked happy. In their opinion, Hua Wuxiu must have defeated Dugu Wubai and ended the battle. The reason why they were so confident was because the Hua family members knew how powerful Hua Wuxiu's Eternal Night Sword domain was. It could be said that in the Eternal Night Sword domain, Hua Wuxiu in his dark form was the Grim Reaper. Any enemy who was pulled into the Eternal Night Sword domain would be greatly suppressed. Hua Wuxiu in his dark form would be strengthened. Under this situation, there was no doubt that Hua Wuxiu would win. Ha! Confuzi, it seems that our Tensei College will be the champion again in this 5 academies competition, Hua Yuntao said to Confuzi with a smile on his face. The real result has not appeared yet. Don't be happy too early. Confuzi stroked his beard with a cold expression. However, one could also see a trace of worry in his eyes. Obviously, although Confuzi looked calm on the surface, he was still worried about Yi Guqin in his heart. After all, Hua Wuxiu's dark form and the Eternal Night Sword domain brought too much pressure. Dugu Wubai. Ling Moyin and the other girls bit their lips. They were also worried about Yi Guqin. On the other side, Yushuang Yan, Ouyang Tianji, Hua Xingjie and the others had an incomparably happy smile on their faces. It was as if they could not wait to see Yi Guqin's embarrassing defeat. Rumble. Under the gazes of everyone, more and more cracks appeared on the pitch-black Eternal Night Sword domain. Finally, in the midst of an explosion, it collapsed. At the same time as it disintegrated, a figure was also sent flying while vomiting blood. As expected. Everyone in the Hua family, including Yi Guqin's enemies, was pleasantly surprised. As for the disciples of Sacred Cliff College, their faces were pale. Did senior brother Dugu lose in the end? Many disciples clenched their fists unwillingly. At this moment, a cultivator's face suddenly froze as he said with extreme surprise and disbelief, that's not right, that figure doesn't seem to be Dugu Wubai? Following his words, the clamor in the crowd instantly turned deathly silent. Hua Yuntao's old face suddenly froze, and he looked over. The figure that was sent flying while vomiting blood was none other than Hua Wuxiu. On the other side, the Eternal Night Sword domain collapsed, and Yi Guqin's figure appeared. Although there were wounds of various sizes on his body, looking at the situation, he didn't suffer any fatal injuries, nor was he crippled. On the contrary, Hua Wuxiu vomited blood, and a huge bloody hole appeared at his waist, almost penetrating his body. This wound was caused by the broken sword style. The crowd was dead silent, and countless people's eyes were about to pop out. Who would have thought that such a scene would occur in the end? Yi Guqin, who was trapped in the Eternal Night Sword domain, didn't suffer much damage. On the contrary, Hua Wuxiu, who used the Eternal Night Sword domain, was severely injured. This caused everyone to feel incredulous. Hua Yuntao, on the other hand, looked as if he had eaten a dead fly, and his face was extremely ugly. Hua Yuntao, this old man said before, don't be happy too early. Confuzi stroked his beard and laughed heartily, extremely carefree. This time, Yiguchen could be said to have won enough face for Sacred Cliff College. Hearing Confucius's words, the corners of Hua Yuntao's eyes twitched, and he was so angry that his hands and feet trembled slightly. All the Hua family members were also shocked and confused. They couldn't understand at all why Hua Wuxiu would lose. As for Yu Shuangyan, Hua Shengjie, Ouyang Tianji, and the others, each and every one of them looked like dead people, and they were all dumbfounded like wood, unable to say anything. Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and the other girls' beautiful eyes were filled with tears, and they were happy for Yiguchen. Dugu Wubai, how much have you hidden? Hua Wuxiu's face was no longer as calm as before. His waist and ribs were bleeding non-stop, and his face was also pale because of the loss of blood. He also didn't understand why Yiguchen's spiritual perception wasn't suppressed by the Eternal Night Sword domain. Moreover, the Earth-grade formation that Yiguchen had used was also something that had never been used before. Hua Wuxiu thought that he had seen through Yiguchen, but in the end, he was still too shallow. Do you think that I will tell you? Yiguchen's expression was indifferent. Even until now, Yiguchen still had many trump cards that he hadn't used. Some of them were related to Yiguchen's original identity, so it wasn't appropriate to use them. Hearing Yiguchen's words, Hua Wuxiu's eyes darkened. Do I really have to use my trump card? Hua Wuxiu's eyes showed a hint of struggle. He indeed had trump cards that he hadn't used yet. However, that trump card was prepared for the Sword Sun battle. If he used them now, he would be in a disadvantageous position in the Sword Master battle. What made Hua Wuxiu more hesitant was that even if he used those trump cards, he wouldn't be able to kill Yiguchen. At most, he would be disabled. Hua Wuxiu really wanted to kill Yiguchen now. I can't kill anyone in the 5 academies competition, and now I can't kill Dugu Wubai even if I use my trump cards. If it's the Sword Master battle, I won't have such concerns. Hua Wuxiu thought in his heart and finally made a decision. Looking at Hua Wuxiu's gradually restrained momentum, everyone in the square was stunned. Was Hua Wuxiu going to stop and admit defeat? The faces of the Hua family were as white as ashes. The strongest genius of the Hua family had to bow down to Yiguchen. If this news spread out, the prestige of the Hua family would definitely plummet. However, seeing Hua Wuxiu's actions, Yiguchen frowned instead. If Hua Wuxiu used all his strength, he wouldn't be afraid at all. If Hua Wuxiu still had some tricks up his sleeve, there would be a change in the outcome of the Sword Sun battle. Dugu Wubai, you're really capable. You've really opened my eyes. Hua Wuxiu took a deep breath and his expression became calm again. Hua Wuxiu, you're really not an ordinary person. You can tolerate what others can't. Yiguchen looked at Hua Wuxiu deeply. Hua Wuxiu's forbearance made Yiguchen think highly of him. He was indeed a somewhat tricky enemy. Then, Hua Wuxiu said with an inexplicable smile on his face, Dugu Wubai, don't be happy too early. The 3 days haven't passed yet. Those geniuses won't allow you to win the 5 academies competition. The moment Hua Wuxiu's voice fell, the other geniuses in the square immediately looked at Yiguchen with sharp eyes. Especially the geniuses of the aristocratic families. If Yiguchen really won the 5 academies competition this time, it would definitely have an extremely unfavorable impact on the aristocratic families. Hua Wuxiu, you. Yiguchen's eyes turned cold. Hua Wuxiu's understatement once again aroused the hostility of the geniuses of the aristocratic families towards Yiguchen. At this moment, Yin Zhu, Ouyang Fengyun, and the other geniuses looked at each other and rushed towards Yiguchen. Not only that, Shengguan Jingshan also brandished his sword and attacked. Jiang Fengmian's body remained motionless, but a sound transmission secretly reached his ears. The sound transmission came from a senior figure of the Jiang family. Jiang Fengmian shook his head and sighed. Alas, there's nothing I can do. As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Fengmian's hand shook. The maple leaf that he was playing with instantly transformed into a maple leaf sword that was as red as fire. Jiang Fengmian, the 5th on the sword list, finally attacked. Chapter 1021. No one expected that Hua Wuxiu's words would cause such a big reaction. Ouyang Fengyun, Yin Zhu, and Shenguan Jingshan all had conflicts with Yi Guqin before. Unexpectedly, Jiang Fengmian, who ranked 5th on the sword list, also made a move. Jiang Fengmian had never made a move before. Even Mu Xingzu's impression of Jiang Fengmian had changed slightly. But now, seeing that Jiang Fengmian also made a move, Mu Xingzu immediately became angry. She stomped her feet and shouted, "Jiang Fengmian, you hypocrite! I thought you were a little different from Shenguan Jingshan, but it turns out that you are jackals of the same tribe." Hearing Mu Xingzu's reprimand, Jiang Fengmian smiled helplessly. In fact, he was unwilling to besiege Yi Guqin. However, the senior members of the Jiang family had sent a voice transmission to Jiang Fengmian to make a move. They could not let Yi Guqin become the champion of the 5 academies competition, so he had no choice but to make a move. Now, the 4 geniuses made a move together, causing an uproar. Jiang Fengmian, ranked 5th on the sword list. Yin Zhu, ranked 6th on the sword list. Shenguan Jingshan, ranked 7th on the sword list. Ouyang Fengyun, ranked 9th on the sword list. The 4 geniuses of the sword list made a move at the same time. Not to mention Yi Guqin, who had consumed a lot of energy at the moment. Even if Hua Wuxiu had been at his peak, he would still have been completely suppressed. Not to mention that in addition to the 4 geniuses of the sword list, there were also many geniuses of the aristocratic families who had decided to give it their all. As for Hua Wuxiu, he frowned slightly. He was proud of his status and did not want to make a move together at this moment. He did want to kill Yi Guqin, but he had to defeat Yi Guqin completely alone. If he did not defeat Yi Guqin completely, there would be a crack in Hua Wuxiu's character. At this moment, the whole place was silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the sword battle square without blinking. The 4 geniuses of the sword list led by dozens of geniuses of the aristocratic families and academies. This force was enough to crush any genius. Even Jian Jinghong probably would not be able to gain any advantage. This is troublesome. Bei Xian Elder and the others were so nervous that their breathing seemed to stop. This should be the last hurdle of the 5 academies competition. If Yi could pass this stage successfully, it would be a miracle. Would be famous, his name would be known in the entire dynasty. It would even affect the judgment of the suzerain of the 360 ridges. After all, many of the lords of the 360 ridges had been roped into the aristocratic family's camp. But some was a neutral group of the aristocratic families. The competition between the 5 academies was undoubtedly a prediction of the battle for the position of the sword master. If Yi Guqin could succeed, it would naturally make those neutral lords lean towards the rogue cultivator camp. However, with the current situation, even the people from the Divine Cliff Academy felt nervous. These were 4 geniuses of the top 10 of the sword list, plus dozens of other geniuses. Not to mention that Yi Guqin had gone through a series of battles and was covered in wounds. Even if the ultimate Sea of Qi could allow Yi Guqin to have an endless supply of true Qi, he would eventually be exhausted. Sigh, what a pity. If Dugu Wubai had signed up for the competition, he might have really become the champion of the 5 academies competition. Yes, Dugu Wubai's strength is indeed worthy of his arrogance, but the current situation is really not good. Some of the rogue cultivators shook their heads and sighed. At this point, no one would doubt Yi Guqin's strength. He's going to lose in the end. Hua Yuntao's expression softened. Although Hua Wuxiu had lost to Yi Guqin, Hua Yuntao knew that Hua Wuxiu's real trump card had not been revealed yet. But in the end, at least Yi Guqin would not be the champion. This made Hua Yuntao's expression slightly better. Just as the entire Sword Sovereign City was watching. Within the battle arena plaza, the final battle had finally begun. Sword of Death, Broken Nether. Yin Zhu swept out with his sword momentum strong. As the 6th on the sword list, his strength was unquestionable. Shenguan Jingshan held the Balrog Sharktooth sword and slashed out, the sword radiance spreading out like a torrent of flames. Burning Flame Sword Principle, Bursting Flame Break. Dragon Swimming Sword Technique, dragon roaring in the sky. Although Ouyang Fengyun had been injured in the battle with Yiguchen, he still had the strength to fight. Now, he attacked again. The last one was Jiang Fengmian. He had not attacked before, so his strength was the most complete. At this moment, the other three people attacked. Jiang Fengmian sighed in his heart, but he had no choice but to attack. Gusu sword technique, moon setting, crow crying, frost filling the sky. Jiang Fengmian's blue hair fluttered in the wind. With the maple leaf sword in his hand, his sword posture was free and unrestrained. His sword was like the moon setting and the crow crying, beautiful and fierce. As the four sword principal prodigies attacked, the rest of the geniuses from the aristocratic families also attacked together. All kinds of swordsmanship moves were displayed, which turned into a gorgeous and terrifying torrent of moves, surging toward Yiguchen. The vigorous torrent of moves poured toward Yiguchen. No sword principal prodigy could withstand such an attack. However, Yiguchen's expression was extremely calm. He sneered and said, "How can I, Dugu Wubai, be treated so well by all the sword principal prodigies? In that case, I will do my best to return the favor." 5 Emperors Cosmos Sword Formation, Attack. Around Yiguchen, the 5 swords of the array suddenly burst out. There was no doubt about the power of an Earth-level formation. In addition, Yiguchen activated his ultimate move again. He used the God-slaying sword technique with his left hand and the immortal slaying sword technique with his right hand. Immortal gods weep. Yiguchen held his 2 swords across the sky and once again displayed a powerful move, Immortal Gods Weep. Rumble. It was as if hundreds of thousands of thunderbolts had exploded at the same time. The terrifying waves almost razed the entire arena to the ground. The ground was full of ravines, and it was a mess. If it were not for the fact that the pseudo-saints had created a true chi shield to cover the entire arena, the remaining waves would have even affected many of the surrounding spectators. At this moment, the arena was full of dust. Amidst the dust, Yiguchen's figure retreated continuously, and he kept coughing up blood. There were also many bloody wounds on his body. No matter how powerful Yiguchen was, he was still human. Facing so many sword principal prodigies, he would still be injured. "Master," Mu Xingzu said with tears in her eyes. Her tone was heart-wrenching, and she wanted to rush into the arena directly. However, she was stopped by Ying Lang and the others. "Xingzhu, you can't interfere. Otherwise, Dugu Wubai's efforts will all be in vain." Ying Lang shouted. Yiguchen could only face the one man against 1,000 men mode alone. If anyone interfered, it would be judged as Yiguchen's failure. That was also the reason why one man against 1,000 men was called hellish difficulty. Everyone felt a chill in their hearts when they saw Yiguchen's miserable state. However, the situation on the other side stunned everyone. More than a dozen sword principal prodigies had collapsed to the ground, their bodies twitching, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. The remaining dozens of sword principal prodigies were also pale and coughing up blood. As for Jiang Fengmian and the other 3 sword principal prodigies who were in the top 10, their mouths were also stained with blood. Yiguchen had fought against a group of sword principal prodigies by himself, and he had actually injured them. At this moment, the world was dead silent. Many sword principal prodigies looked at Yiguchen, who was all alone, and they were all shocked. If Yiguchen could really succeed today, then he would become a true legend among the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty. Chapter 1022. At that moment, Yiguchen was holding his sword with both hands, and his clothes were stained with blood. Even his black hair had turned a deep dark red because it was dyed with blood. Blood continued to drip from his chin. However, Yiguchen did not seem to notice. A pair of pitch-black bottomless eyes, with a deep and profound look. Nothing could make the sword demon afraid. Nothing could make the sword sect afraid. Even if he was blocked by countless people, Yiguchen wanted to turn the tables with his own strength. Again. Yiguchen roared coldly. Like a demon in the sword, his sword aura rampaged and wreaked havoc in all directions. Not only did his aura not fall, but it also skyrocketed again, as if he wanted to compete with the heavens. Damn it, let's continue. Ju and the others did not look too good. The fact that they had besieged the sword roll prodigy was already considered to have lost all face. However, they still could not defeat Yi Chen with such a siege. The longer this dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for Ju and the others. They no longer held back. Their auras rose to the peak as they fought with Yi Chen. Shangguan Jingshan's giant sword swept across with great force. Ju was very agile. He was like a deadly assassin, attacking from tricky angles from time to time. Ouyang Fengyun also attacked with all his might. Although Jiang Fengmian was a little helpless, he had to obey the orders of the Jiang family's higher-ups. He could only attack. Gusu sword technique, Jiang Feng's fisherman's fire versus choking sleep. Jiang Fengmian attacked again. The maple leaf sword's sword aura swept out as if it had turned into maple leaves. Each maple leaf carried a sharp sword aura. Yi Chen blocked with his sword. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Although Jiang Fengmian's sword aura looked strong, it did not bring much pressure. He could not help but look at Jiang Fengmian in surprise. Jiang Fengmian's expression didn't change, but there was a dim light in the depths of his eyes. Yi Chen instantly understood. Jiang Fengmian didn't really want to make a move on him. He was afraid that it was because of the Jiang family behind him. Thinking up to this point, Yi Chen did not say anything. Everyone is well aware of this. Although Jiang Fengmian had held back a little, the power of his moves could not be considered weak. Because if they were too weak, anyone would be able to tell that Jiang Fengmian was holding back. Therefore, Jiang Fengmian had actually used 70% of his strength. Not to mention the fact that the other three geniuses on the sword roll were attacking with all their might. The rest of the geniuses made their moves too. Time trickled by. The previous series of battles had already taken more than 2 days. There were only a few hours left until the third day. At this moment, Yi Chen's body was covered with wounds. If not for his perfect physical body and the recovery ability of the ancient god body, he would have collapsed long ago. However, in such a continuous high-intensity battle, even if Yi Chen's energy reserve could withstand it, his mind was somewhat exhausted. After all, Yi Chen was a human, not a god. However, the geniuses besieging Yi Chen were all panting and exhausted. He can still hold on. The entire sword battle square, and even the entire sword monarch city, was silent at this moment. Yi Chen's performance had really exceeded their expectations. At this point, even some of the warriors from the aristocratic family's camp could not help but admire Yi Chen. Are you still going to hide your strength at this point? If we can't even deal with Duga Wubai, what face do we have left? Ju said with an ugly expression. Shanghai Jingshan and Ouyang Fengyun also frowned. Yi Chen was like an unkillable cockroach. Although Yi Chen could not kill them, they could not defeat Yi Chen either. Whether it was in terms of true energy endurance or physical strength, Yi Chen was stronger than almost all of the geniuses present. This was also the reason why Yi Chen dared to activate the strength of 1,000 men mode. The problem now was that the duration of the strength of 1,000 men was only 3 days. Yi Chen could afford to drag it out, but they could not. Ju is right. If we can't defeat Yi Chen together, we will definitely become the laughingstock of the entire sword dynasty. Let's not hold back anymore, Ouyang Fengyun said. That's right. Shanghai Jingshan nodded slightly. After everyone reached an agreement, they also used their last resort. Scorching Flame Sword Technique, Scorching Flame 9 Heavens. Shanghai Jingshan's true energy surged like flames. He swung his sword 9 times in succession, each of which transformed into a shocking wave of flames. Ouyang Fengyun also pushed his strength to the limit and unleashed an extremely powerful sword strike. Clouds follow the dragon, wind follows the tiger. Heavenly sword cry of dragon and tiger. Death god's single strike. Ju condensed all of his sword chi, and a terrifying dark sword light pulsed from the tip of his sword. He swung his sword horizontally, and it was as if the death god was about to take a life. Finally, Jiang Fengmian also made his move. Autumn Maple Sword Dance. Jiang Fengmian swung his sword, and his sword qi transformed into maple leaves that drifted through the air. Amidst the solemnity, there was a sword intent that could wither all things. Not only the four sovereigns, but the rest of the sovereigns who were besieging Yi Guchen also exerted all their strength to display their trump cards. Everyone simultaneously displayed their most powerful skills, and a torrent of sword qi that was even more terrifying than before swept out. Let alone those of the divine dwelling stage. Even some of the heavenly palace stage sovereigns were a little shocked. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. Everyone's eyes were filled with different emotions as they stared at Yi Guchen. This move could be said to be a fatal move. If Yi Guchen couldn't withstand it, he wouldn't just lose the championship. It was even possible that his cultivation would be crippled. At this moment, even Confuzi was highly focused. If anything happened to Yi Guchen, he would immediately take action to save Yi Guchen. After all, a natural saint was far more important than the title of champion. In the face of the torrent of moves that were almost unstoppable, even Yi Guchen felt a faint pressure, and his breathing became somewhat labored. But there was no fear or alarm in his deep eyes. Endless golden light surged on the surface of Yi Guchen's body, and the ancient god power spread. Finally, a golden armor condensed on the surface of Yi Guchen's body. The armor's surface was covered with many ancient and primordial totem patterns, and it looked boundless and heavy. It was the ancient god clan's ultimate defensive skill, the ancient god immovable king armor. Not only that, Yi Guchen pointed a finger between his eyebrows, and a terrifying spirit wave swept out like an endless wave. Dugu's 9 swords, heart sword style. In the sky, the dragon sword floating in the clouds, as if it had been summoned, whizzed down with endless sword qi. The dragon sword was formed by Yi Guchen's heart sword style and the all-creation sword intent. It was extremely powerful. But it was only a one-time use. Even so, it was enough to deal with the current situation. Yi Guchen did not reveal the all-creation sword intent, as it would be his trump card in the battle for the Sword Sun title. But Dugu's 9 swords, heart sword style, was unleashed without reservation. The terrifying spiritual energy fluctuation caused some of the sovereigns to be extremely stunned. This Dugu Wubai not only has a strong physical body, but he also has such high attainments in spirit power. I see. Is this the reason why your spirit perception is not suppressed by the eternal night sword domain? Hua Wuxiu revealed a look of realization. Now, Yi Guchen's heart sword style activated the dragon sword, and it exploded with extreme power. Yi Guchen pointed his sword at the crowd, and along with the roar of the dragon sword, a voice whizzed out. Who can understand the wind in the sword? Sword Demon Wubai, Dugu. One move to make you all bow down. Chapter 1023. One move to make all of you bow down. Yi Guchen's words were like the words of a god, carrying a heroic spirit that could swallow thousands of miles. How many geniuses in the Sword Dynasty would dare to speak to the geniuses of the sword ranking in such a manner? At this moment, even the rogue cultivators who sided with the aristocratic families could not help but feel a trace of admiration for Yi Guchen. Although they were in different camps, the heroism and pride of a sword cultivator was admirable. At this moment, the entire sword battle square and even the sword sovereign city were silent. Everyone's breathing almost stopped as they quietly waited for the final result. The deans and elders of the 5 academies also waved their hands, forming a solid true energy shield that covered the entire sword battle square to prevent the aftermath of the collision from spreading. On one side were the ultimate moves of the 4 geniuses of the sword ranking and dozens of geniuses of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. On the other side were Yi Guchen's unique 9 Dugu swords and the sword dragon condensed in the sword tomb. The two finally collided fiercely in front of everyone's eyes. The world seemed to have lost its sound at this moment, and all sound stopped. It was as if everything had returned to silence. This deathly silence continued for a few breaths of time. Then, there was a terrifying roar that shook the heavens and the earth. Boom! Like the explosion of a nuclear bomb or the shattering of the sun, endless ripples of sword chi poured out like a broken dam, fiercely hitting the true energy shield. The genuine chi shield condensed by a false saint expert actually shook violently under such a collision. In the endless waves of dust, there were many screams and cries of blood. The geniuses of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth who were besieging were thrown out like scattered fireworks. Blood was spat out like it was free. Then, one by one, the geniuses fell to the ground and fell unconscious. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. At the same time, Shangguan Jingshan, Jiang Fengmian, and the other geniuses of the sword ranking were all sent flying, spitting out blood, and their bodies were covered with sword wounds. After all, the dragon's sword was formed from thousands of ancient swords from the sword mound. It contained countless sharp sword chi, and it was not something they could block. He looked at the 4 injured geniuses on the sword roll who were vomiting blood. The entire place fell into a dead silence at this moment. The sound of people swallowing their saliva could be heard. No one had expected that the geniuses who were besieging them would end up in such a miserable state. What was even more unexpected was that 4 prodigies in the top 10 of the sword roll would actually end up in such a sorry state even after joining forces. However, the most important thing right now wasn't the sky prides. It was Yiguchen. As everyone expected, Yiguchen's situation would not be any better, as he had withstood the unique attacks of so many geniuses by himself. Yiguchen was heavily injured and had fainted on the ground. This meant that the strength of 1,000 men challenge had undoubtedly ended in failure. In the end, Hua Wuxiu would be the champion. Thus, at that moment, everyone's gazes landed on the other side. The dust that filled the sky slowly dissipated. The entire sword battle square was almost in pieces. Everyone from Sacred Cliff College held their breaths and were so nervous that they were sweating profusely. What was the outcome of this year's 5 Academies competition? What was Yiguchen's state? Under the gazes of hundreds of thousands of martial artists, the dust dissipated. Yiguchen's figure was finally revealed. He held his sword in front of him with both hands. That mystical pattern divine weapon was already full of cracks and was almost broken. Even a supreme-grade mystical pattern divine weapon could not withstand such an attack. For the first time, the immovable king armor on his body was also full of broken patterns and was on the verge of collapsing. However, Yiguchen's figure was still standing firmly. His blood-stained face and determined expression were still as unmoving as a boulder. At that moment, Yiguchen was like a peerless divine sword that stood between heaven and earth, exuding an unprecedented pride and sharpness. Yiguchen did not fall. The expressions of the many Sacred Cliff College disciples were first dazed, then tears welled up in their eyes. After that, they started to shout and roar with incomparable fanaticism. The person in front of them was the sword demon Duga Wubai. He was the disciple of Sacred Cliff College's holy emblem, the eternal pride. Endless exclamations and shouts seemed to be about to break through the sky of the entire sword sovereign city. Yiguchen withstood the attacks of so many prodigies by himself and was still determined to fight. He did not fall. Regardless of the final outcome, Yiguchen's figure standing proudly at that moment was deeply imprinted in the eyes of all the surrounding martial artists. Even the lords of the 360 ridges had looks of admiration in their eyes. Some of the lords even had a long-lost passion in their eyes. What was a sword cultivator? Like Yiguchen. He actually withstood it. Hua Wuxiu's expression froze. If it were him, he would also have to pay a heavy price for such a besieging attack. However, Yiguchen had been through a series of battles before, and now he was still able to withstand such an attack. This was indeed greatly beyond Hua Wuxiu's expectations. The prodigies of the aristocratic families, including Hua Shengjie, Yu Shuangyan, and the others, were all like corpses. Their eyes were numb, and their bodies were stiff. Tianxian College disciples were like this. Wu Hongyan's beautiful eyes lit up. Yiguchen's performance surprised her, but at the same time, she also admired him. As for Suki Miyazaki, for the first time, an extremely complicated expression appeared on her face. Because of Mu Xingzu, Suki Miyazaki had always disapproved of Yiguchin. She even thought that Yiguchin was far inferior to Jian Jinghong. But now, Yiguchin's performance fiercely shocked Suki Miyazaki. In the entire Sword Dynasty, how many people could perform like this? Even Jian Jinghong, who had once defeated Suki Miyazaki, was not as good as this. Compared to Suki Miyazaki's mixed feelings, Mu Xingzu, Han Lingxian, and Ling Moyin's eyes were filled with tears of joy. This was the indomitable Yiguchin in their hearts. In the shattered sword battle square, Yiguchin held his sword with both hands, like the king of swords, and coldly looked at Shengguan Jingshan and the others. Shengguan Jingshan, Yin Ju, and the others' expressions were extremely ugly. They did not expect that even with their combined efforts, they would not be able to defeat Yiguchin. What made them even more embarrassed was that in their hearts, they were actually afraid of Yiguchin. One had to know that they were all prodigies on the sword ranking. In the Sword Dynasty, almost no one of their generation could make them afraid. But now, Yiguchin had done it. Not only did he make them afraid, but he also made them feel a trace of fear. Do you want to continue? Yiguchin's tone was indifferent. That one sentence made Shengguan Jingshan and the others subconsciously take a step back. As for the few prodigies on the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth who were still conscious, their eyes were filled with fear. They looked at Yiguchin as if they were looking at the king of hell. Yiguchin's words made the prodigies not dare to act rashly. Such a situation caused everyone to be astounded once more. This was the true strength of one man against 1,000. Who in the world can be a match for one man? Two swords in the sky, aspiring to the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the dynasty. If anyone is not convinced, there's no harm in fighting again. Chapter 1024. Yiguchin's voice was as cold as the reprimand of a deity. However, no one in the field dared to act rashly. At this moment, the referee also shouted, 3 days have passed. Sacred Cliff College's Dugu Wubai has successfully challenged the strength of 1,000-men mode. The champion of the 5 Academies tournament is Dugu Wubai, a disciple of the Holy Emblem of Sacred Cliff College. In the end, the referee's words completely finalized the result. The champion of the 5 Academies tournament belonged to Sacred Cliff College in Yiguchin. Wow! An earth-shattering clamor resounded once again. All the disciples of Sacred Cliff College burst into cheers. Even the various elders and the 5 hall masters had joyous expressions on their faces. Yiguchin had turned the situation around and secured the victory of the 5 Academies tournament by himself. This was also the loudest sound that Sacred Cliff College had made after a long period of silence. Compared to the excitement of Sacred Cliff College, many disciples of Tensei College, Sun Moon College, and Long River College were ashen-faced. And those from the aristocratic families were also upset, as if they had eaten a fly. This 5 Academies tournament was far-reaching and significant because it was close to the Sword Sun battle. If Hua Wuxiu had won the championship, the reputation of the aristocratic families would have reached an unprecedented peak. But now, it was ruined by Yiguchin alone. Damn it! Even with Hua Yuntao's pseudo-saint state of mind, he was so angry that his old face twitched, and his withered hands clenched tightly. If not for the presence of Confuzi, Wu Hongyan, and the others, he would have slapped Yiguchin to death. TSK, what an unexpected result. In the sky, several sword sons from the aristocratic families shook their heads. They didn't want to see Yiguchin win because it would affect the prestige of the aristocratic families. However, this Dugu Wubai winning the championship is not what that person is willing to see. Sword 2's tone seemed to have a deeper meaning. At the mention of that person, the sword sons of the aristocratic families fell silent. The faces under the masks were filled with a trace of reverence. In the entire Sword Dynasty, there was only one person who could make these sword sons reveal such expressions. He was the rumored leader of the 13 swordsmen, Jinkui, who was also the current Jinkui. The sword leader's prestige in the Sword Dynasty exceeded that of Hua Wuxiu, Jian Jinghong, and other prodigies on the sword ranking. On the other side, the sword sons of the rogue cultivators were in a good mood. I already said that Brother Dugu is a person who can create miracles. He has the qualifications to become a sword son, or even Jiankui. Kenpo said with a bright smile. Other than Yi Tianqing, Kenfuzi, and Leng Qianhen, he was also one of the few people who knew Yi Guqin's true identity. Naturally, he had confidence in Yi Guqin. You said that Dugu Wubai can become a sword son, but it's not certain if he can become Jiankui. Even little 13 won't have an easy time dealing with that Jiankui. Jian Shi said. She was the only female sword son in the rogue cultivator's camp. She had some feelings for Jian Shisan in her heart. Naturally, her heart was on Jian Shisan's side. Yi Guqin's performance was amazing. But in Jian Shi's heart, Jian Shisan was the most likely candidate to compete for the position of Jiankui. Hearing this, Jian Shisan, who was wearing a ghost mask, said in a hoarse voice, Jiankui is very strong, and Dugu Wubai is not weak either. I'm not sure I can win against them. No matter what, Dugu Wubai is still a heavenly son of the rogue cultivator's camp. The stronger he is, the more help he will be to us. Jian Wu said. The entire Sword Battle Square and even the Sword Emperor City were in a state of excitement. Sacred Cliff College hadn't won the 5 Academies tournament for a long time. Not to mention, Yi Guqin didn't win the tournament through ordinary means, but through the method of 1 man against 1,000. This was even more shocking. One could imagine that this 5 Academies tournament would have a far-reaching impact on the entire Sword dynasty. It would even affect the faction of the rogue cultivators and the aristocratic families. At least in terms of reputation, the rogue cultivators' camp had recovered 10%. At this moment, all the rogue cultivators' people were cheering, while the aristocratic family's warriors were all dejected. Shangguan Jingshan, Yin Zhu, and the others' faces alternated between green and white. They were very embarrassed. They couldn't defeat Yi Guqin even if they joined forces. In the future, their reputation in the Sword dynasty would undoubtedly fall to the bottom. Dugu Wubai, don't be too proud. Hua Wuxiu's tone was indifferent. Although Yi Guqin's strength was beyond Hua Wuxiu's expectations. But Hua Wuxiu was also confident in his own trump card. He believed that as long as he used his trump card, even Yi Guqin would find it difficult to resist. When the time came, Hua Wuxiu would personally avenge today's humiliation in the battle for the Sword Master title. Hearing Hua Wuxiu's words, Yi Guqin smiled faintly and said, then I'll wait and see your performance in the battle for the Sword Master title. Yi Guqin knew that Hua Wuxiu must be holding back. But Hua Wuxiu didn't know that Yi Guqin also had more than one trump card. Ultimate Sword Domain, All Creation Sword Intent, Lightning Sword Principle. Yi Guqin didn't show these 3 trump cards. And in the battle for the Sword Master title, Yi Guqin was confident that with these 3 trump cards, he would give the aristocratic family's elites a big surprise. Just as the audience was in an uproar. In the distant sky, a golden flying boat suddenly crossed the void and came over. A figure was standing on top of the flying boat. The figure was tall and slender, and he wore an ancient mottled bronze mask on his face. He looked like a god fiend. His dark golden hair fluttered in the void, and he had an awe-inspiring aura. His right hand was behind his back, and his left hand was holding a bronze pagoda. The most noticeable thing was that he only had 4 fingers on his left hand, and he was missing a little finger. With the arrival of this figure, the entire bustling arena suddenly quietened down. The various sword sons in the sky were even more shocked. The sword sons of the independent cultivators' camp were extremely solemn. The sword sons of the aristocratic family's camp were slightly surprised. They didn't expect this person to appear. Seeing the sudden change in the atmosphere, Yi Guqin's gaze also fell on that figure. It's Jiankui. A warrior's eyes widened as he shouted. Jiankui, the head of the 13 sword sons of the Sword dynasty. If it was any other dynasty, he would be the crown prince. Yi Guqin also raised his eyebrows slightly. He didn't expect to finally meet the legendary Jiankui after so long. Jiankui stood in the sky with a bronze mask on his face and a bronze pagoda in his hand. His dark golden hair fluttered in the wind, and he looked like a god fiend with an awe-inspiring aura. Feeling Jinkuei's aura, Yi Guqin frowned. Jinkuei's hidden aura was even more oppressive than Hua Wuxiu's. In addition, Yi Guqin also vaguely felt that there was something strange about Jinkuei. At this moment, Su Qingyu's voice sounded in Yi Guqin's mind. Yi Guqin, you have to be careful. This person's soul fluctuations are very strange. I'm afraid he's not that simple. Hearing Su Qingyu's warning, Yi Guqin was also surprised. He didn't expect that even Su Qingyu would say that there was something strange about Jinkuei. The atmosphere in the arena became a little gloomy because of Jinkuei's arrival. At this moment, Jinkuei's gaze fell on Yi Guqin. He said indifferently, "Dugu Wubai, is it? You did well. You have two choices now. 1. Become my follower. 2. Lose to me in the battle for the Sword Sun position." Chapter 1025. Jinkuei's words were like the decree of a god, spreading throughout the entire Sword Battle Square and even the Sword Imperial City. For a time, all the noise disappeared. Everyone's face was frozen with extreme horror. They didn't expect that the Sword Chief would open with such overbearing words the moment he arrived. What kind of existence was Yi Guqin now in the Sword Dynasty? As a disciple of the Holy Emblem of Sacred Cliff College, he passed through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing in one fell swoop and was titled as a natural saint. In the Sword Tomb, he broke the record of Jian Jinghong and stepped into the 10,000 feet ground. In the 5 Academies tournament, he defeated a group of geniuses in the 1 against 1,000 mode and successfully won the championship. It could be said that now, Yi Guqin was almost a godlike existence among the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty. Even Hua Wuxiu, who was third on the sword ranking, was not qualified to say such words. But Jinkuei opened his mouth like this, acting as if it was a matter of course. How domineering such an attitude was. Hearing Jinkuei's words, all the disciples of Sacred Cliff College flushed, and their eyes were almost spitting fire. Yi Guqin could now be said to be the benchmark and leader of Sacred Cliff College and even the entire Rogue Cultivator camp. Jinkuei actually said that he wanted Yi Guqin to become his follower, or he would kill him in the battle for the Sword Sun title. If it were other geniuses, even Hua Wuxiu, they would not dare to say that they would kill Yi Guqin, or even suppress him. However, the Sword Chieftain just had to say that. After a brief moment of silence, a clamor broke out. Everyone was amazed by Jinkuei's overbearing attitude. Yi Guqin had just become the champion of the 5 Academies tournament, and Jinkuei spoke like this, undoubtedly to suppress Yi Guqin's victory halo. Even Mu Xingzu was furious. Her master was someone who had once fought with Di Haotian. What qualifications did Jinkuei have to make Yi Guqin his follower? Many people from Sacred Cliff College were cursing in their hearts, but they didn't dare to show it. After all, Jinkuei's identity was there. No matter how disgusted and disdainful people were, they could not casually insult the Crown Prince. The Sword Chief is still as arrogant as ever. On the Sword Sun's side, the corners of Saber Nine's lips curled into a smirk. This Jinkuei was the enemy of all the Sword Suns in the Rogue Cultivator camp. Only those with capital can be arrogant. Little 13, what do you think? Jian Wu turned to Jian Shisan. Sword 13's tone was indifferent as he said, his strength has become stronger again. No matter what, Jian Shisan, we all believe that you can defeat Jinkuei. Jian Shi said. He had great confidence in Jian Shisan. Jian Shisan was indifferent. His eyes under the grimace mask were dark and deep. TSK, Big Brother is still as domineering as ever. I wonder if Dugu Wubai will submit to Big Brother. Sword 3 was interested. Dugu Wubai won't submit so easily, Sword 2 said thoughtfully. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Yi Guqin at this moment. Jinkuei was able to become the leader of the 13 Sword Sons because of his strength. He was even more dangerous than Hua Wuxiu. Many people stared at Yi Guqin. They wanted to see how Yi Guqin would choose. Would he choose to submit to Jinkuei and become his follower? Or would he fight to the death with Jinkuei in the battle for the position of Sword Sun? Yiguchen smiled coldly and looked at Jinkui. Although he didn't know what was so strange about Jinkui at the moment, that didn't stop him from making a choice. You want me to be your follower? Are you worthy? Let's not talk about you, Jinkui. Even in this vast world, there is no one who can make me, Dugu Wubai, follow. In the past, in the present, and in the future, there will be none. I, Dugu Wubai, will only walk my own path. If anyone wants to block my path, sorry. Yiguchen slowly raised the 9-dragon thunder prison sword in his hand. The sword tip pointed straight at Jinkui. Life and death questioning sword edge. As soon as Yiguchen finished speaking, a storm seemed to have set off between heaven and earth. A suffocating pressure swept out in all directions. Everyone was stunned. They had guessed that with Yiguchen's pride, he wouldn't agree so easily. However, they had never expected that not only did Yiguchen not agree to it, but he also opposed it with equal harshness. Hearing Yiguchen's words, Jinkui's expression didn't change. For a moment, the atmosphere was silent. An oppressive pressure caused many of the skyprides present to feel their chests tighten, making it difficult for them to breathe. After a long while, Jinkui shook his head and sighed. Unfortunately, since ancient times, heroes have short lives. If you live, you'll be a natural saint. If you don't, you'll be a pile of bones. Jinkui's words had a hidden meaning. Everyone understood what he meant. He said that Yiguchen wouldn't survive the battle for the position of Sword Sun. In the past, there were no restrictions on the methods used. Naturally, there were no restrictions on life and death. This was also the rule of the Sword Dynasty. The 5 Academies tournament was actually just an exchange of pointers. But the Sword Sun represented the future high-level powerhouse of the Sword Dynasty. Only through the experience of blood and fire could one grow. Therefore, the battle for the position of Sword Sun was also a battle of life and death. Those who were afraid of death would not participate. My life isn't that easy to lose. Jinkui doesn't have to worry about this. Yiguchen's expression was indifferent and his tone was calm. This performance made many people look at him in a new light. After all, Jinkui was almost the ceiling of the Sword Dynasty's younger generation. There were only a few people who could compete with him. Okay, then I'll see how tough your life is. Jinkui's tone was deep and cold. He also saw that Yiguchen had extraordinary potential and wanted to take him as a follower. Logically speaking, if it was an ordinary person, it would be something that they couldn't even ask for. It would be a supreme honor. Unfortunately, he had misjudged him. This Dugu Wubai is really a troublemaker. Yin Ju, Ouyang Fengyun, and the others coldly said. First, he provoked Hua Wuxiu. Now, he provoked Jinkui. They couldn't help but worry about Yiguchen's safety in the battle for the position of Sword Sun. Will young Master Dugu be okay? Han Lingxian asked worriedly. Don't worry. After all, the Sword Sun of the Rogue Cultivator camp, as well as Jian Jinghong and the others, will not let Brother Dugu face those opponents alone. Xuanlian said. In short, the conflict between Yiguchen and Jinkui. From another perspective, it was also a conflict between the aristocratic families and the Rogue Cultivator camp. In this battle for the position of Sword Sun, Jinkui must not be allowed to win first place again. Otherwise, the 5 pseudo-saint aristocratic families would definitely use this as an excuse to seize the right to speak in the Sword Dao Alliance. This was also what Kenpo had asked Yiguchen to do before. The entire Sword Emperor city also became noisy because of the conflict between Yiguchen and Jinkui. At this moment, pseudo-saint experts from the 5 academies walked out. Kenfuzi, Wu Hongyan, Hua Yuntao, Shanghai Bo, and Yin Lingshan also stepped into the sky. Seeing the 5 pseudo-saint experts step out, the crowd fell silent again. They all stared at the 5 pseudo-saint experts in surprise. Hadn't the 5 academies competition already ended? What was the meaning of all this? Just when everyone was puzzled, Kenfuzi stepped out, cleared his throat, and said, Everyone, in addition to the 5 academies competition, there is another important thing to announce in the Sword Emperor city. This is a major event related to the entire Sword Dynasty, which is the battle for the position of Sword Sun. As soon as Confuzi finished speaking, the crowd was once again in an uproar. Was the battle for the position of Sword Sun going to start now? The Sword Suns in the sky all had strange expressions on their faces. However, they seemed to have already received some news. As for Hua Wuxiu and the other geniuses on the sword ranking, they all had strange looks in their eyes. This time, the battle for the position of Sword Sun will be different from the past. It will be held in the Myriad Demon's Nest. As soon as his words fell, it stirred up a huge uproar. Chapter 1026. What? Did I hear wrong? The Nest of Demons? Is it that Nest of Demons? Nonsense, if it's not the Nest of Myriad Demons, who else could it be? What's going on? Is the Nest of Demons a place for humans? I'm afraid they'll be torn to pieces before they even get in. Hearing Confuzi's words, most of the martial artists were shocked. Yi Guqin had already returned to the crowd of Sacred Cliff College. He frowned and asked, Nest of Demons? Where is that? The Nest of Demons is a famous place of danger. It's a place where many monsters live and gather. It's rumored that there's a monster king at the peak of the 7th rank there, Ling Moyne replied in a serious tone. A monster king at the peak of the 7th rank. Yi Guqin was also shocked. A monster king at the peak of the 7th rank was as intelligent as a human, and its strength was comparable to a human false saint. If it could take that step and become a monster king at the 8th rank, it would be comparable to a human heaven's tribulation sage. Of course, monsters were stronger than humans at the same level. However, it was more difficult for them to break through than humans. Therefore, a monster king at the 8th rank was rarer than a human heaven's tribulation sage. Although the Nest of Demons was a place where countless monsters gathered, no one had ever seen a monster king at the 8th rank. However, there were a few monster kings at the 7th rank. This was also the reason why many of the cultivators present were surprised. In a place like the Nest of Demons, not to mention a group of prodigies. Even a false saint would not be able to get away with it if he entered alone. If he was discovered by a monster king or besieged by a stampede of monsters, he would be at risk of losing his life. Compared to the other prodigies, Yi Guqin was very calm. He knew that the Sword Dynasty would not be stupid enough to let their prodigies die in the Nest of Demons. There must be a deeper meaning behind it. However, the Nest of Demons reminded Yi Guqin of the divine Condor and Blackie, who he had been separated from for a long time. Previously, when Su Qingyu used up all his soul power to tear open space and take them away from the infinite wilderness plain. The divine Condor and Little Hay had been separated from Yi Guqin. There was still no news about them. The ancient god's jade archive in Yi Guqin's origin ring did not detect any trace of Blackie's aura. Obviously, the divine Condor and Blackie weren't in the Sword Dynasty. The Nest of Myriad Demons was a place where demonic beasts gathered. Perhaps he could find some clues about the divine Condor and Blackie there. As for their safety, Yi Guqin wasn't too worried about it. The divine Condor was a cunning spirit. He would never put himself in danger. As for Little Black, there was no need to even mention it. As one of the 100 races in the universe, the chaotic world demonic ape clan possessed an indestructible demonic body, and their vitality and recovery abilities were shockingly strong. Unless there was a heavenly tribulation saint or a rank 8 demon royal, no one would be able to hurt Blackie. If they were really in the Myriad Demon's Nest, not only would they not be in any danger, they might even be able to live a comfortable life. Of course, this was only Yi Guqin's guess. After all, spatial cracks could lead to anywhere. There was no fixed number. After that, Yi Guqin continued to observe Confuzi. He knew that there must be more to the story. As for why the Sword Sun battle is held in the Myriad Demon's Nest, it is because there is a treasure left by the ancient sacred dynasty there, Confuzi continued. His words once again caused a huge uproar. As expected. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He had obtained a quarter of the incomplete map in the ancient Chaos Wilderness. The other 3 were taken by the War God Dynasty, the Maluo Dynasty, and the tyrannical Saber Dynasty. Later, there was also news that the four dynasties were in contact with the ancient sacred dynasty, hoping that the treasure left by the ancient sacred dynasty would appear. Yiguchen had learned in the Great Tomb that the ancient sacred dynasty was the ancient ruins sacred dynasty. In other words, the location of the ancient ruins sacred dynasty's treasure was in the myriad demon's nest. Hearing Master Jian's words, a glint flashed in the eyes of Sword Chief, who was standing in the sky, under the bronze mask. This time, the Sword Dynasty and the other three dynasties will join forces to explore the myriad demon's nest. Those demonic beast kings and high-rank demonic beasts will be delayed by the experts of the four great dynasties. The remaining treasures of the sacred dynasty will be explored by the geniuses. And this time, the outcome of the battle for the position of Sword Sun will also be determined based on the value of the treasures obtained. The one who obtains the most opportunities will be the Jinkue. After Confuzi finished speaking, the whole place fell into a dead silence. The Sword Sun battle this time was different from the previous ones. In the past, the Sword Sun battle was held within the Sword Dynasty, and the competitors were only the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty. But this time, they would be going to the extremely dangerous myriad demon's nest. Even if the monster kings and high-level monster beasts were stopped by the experts, the remaining monster beasts were also very dangerous. Not to mention, there was also the terrifying beast horde. Other than that, the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty would fight among themselves for the Sword Sun battle. As for the Sword Sun battle, Mo Luo, Ba Dao, and the other three dynasties, they would also send the geniuses of the God of War list, Blood list, and Saber list into the Sacred Dynasty to obtain opportunities. The battle for the position of Sword Master this time was far more dangerous than any of the previous ones. The dangers of the monster beasts. The dangers of the geniuses of the other dynasties. The dangers of the Sacred Dynasty's treasure. And the dangers of the internal battles. With all these dangers stacked together, the difficulty level of the Sword Sun battle could be described as hellish. Many geniuses turned pale at that moment. Even some of the geniuses of the Sword list swallowed their saliva. Such a hellish difficulty level of the Sword Sun battle had never appeared before. One could imagine how dangerous it would be to participate in the Sword Sun battle this time, and the chances of losing one's life would be greatly increased. Even Hua Wuxiu, Yin Zhu, Shangguan Jingshen, and the others were frowning. With such a degree of difficulty, they might not even be able to make it back alive, let alone obtain the Sword Sun battle. Fortunately, the Sword Dynasty was the leader of the 100 great dynasties after all. Although most of the geniuses were slightly pale, they did not think of quitting. Seeing this, Confuzi said calmly, the Sword Sun battle this time is unprecedentedly dangerous, but the rewards will definitely not be small. You can imagine the opportunities in the ancient sacred dynasty's treasure. Moreover, before you go to the Thousand Demon Nest, the ancient sword tomb will open again, and you can all enter to cultivate. There is such a treatment. Hearing this, the genius's eyes lit up. Yiguchen's eyes flashed as well. Yiguchen was no stranger to the ancient sword tomb. The Sword Dynasty had 4 mystic realms, Mount Saint Crossing, Sword Tomb, Ancient Sword Tomb, and Skyless Sword Realm. The ancient sword tomb was not like the sword tomb, where anyone could enter at will. Therefore, every time it opened, it was an extremely precious opportunity. The ancient sword tomb contained many sword techniques left behind by the ancestors of the Sword Dynasty. There was also a Heaven Dao stone tablet, which could be used to comprehend, practice, and even create sword techniques. Moreover, the Heaven Dao stone tablet could release different levels of brilliance according to the power of the sword technique created. It was extremely magical. If the sword tomb was the best place to comprehend sword intent, then the ancient sword tomb was the best place to cultivate sword techniques and even create sword techniques. Creating your own swordsmanship. Yiguchen's lips curled into a faint smile. Yiguchen had not created his own sword technique for a long time, ever since the Pathos of Heaven. It was not that he did not have the ability to create one, but that he was accumulating and comprehending. It was fine if he did not create one, but once he did, it would definitely be earth-shattering. Yiguchen was also very curious. If he could enter the ancient sword tomb, would he be able to create an amazing sword technique? Chapter 1027. As Confuzi finished explaining the series of matters, the entire Sword Emperor city fell into a fierce clamor and discussion. This time's Sword Sun battle was different from the past. It would definitely be exciting and intense. Not to mention that they would have to compete with the geniuses of the other three top dynasties, which brought about even more variables. There were also people who were curious about who would become the Sword Sun, or even Jiankuei. Many martial artists could not help but look at Yi Guqin. In the 5 Academies tournament, he had swept away all the geniuses and won the championship. Would he be able to withstand such a hellish test? Before it began, everything was unknown. The ancient sword tomb will open in half a month. All the geniuses of the 5 academies should go back and recuperate. Be prepared. The ancient sword tomb is your last chance to improve your strength, Confuzi warned. Yi Guqin also nodded secretly. This time's Sword Sun battle was unprecedentedly difficult. Yi Guqin also needed the help of the ancient sword tomb to cultivate the All Heaven's End, Ultimate Sword Domain, and other trump cards. Yi Guqin also wanted to obtain some of the predecessor's supreme techniques in the ancient sword tomb. As the Sword Dynasty was a country of sword cultivators, the ancient sword tomb naturally had some sword techniques left behind by the predecessors. Of course, most importantly, Yi Guqin also wanted to use the Heavenly Dao Stone Tablet's ability to practice and create his own sword technique martial arts. After that, the 5 academies also began to prepare to leave the Sword Emperor city and embark on the journey back home. The sword leader glanced at Yi Guqin before he left. Then, he left behind a few words. Cherish your last days. After saying that, Jiankuei turned and left. These words caused the surroundings to quiet down. Jiankuei's character was domineering and arrogant. In the Sword Dynasty, almost no one dared to go against him. However, Yi Guqin went against Jiankuei in front of hundreds of thousands of Sword Dynasty martial artists. This undoubtedly caused Jiankuei to feel an icy killing intent towards Yi Guqin. The threat in his words caused Confuzi and the rest to frown slightly. But he couldn't say anything. The battle for the position of Sword Master did not forbid killing. Those who had the qualifications to become the Sword Sun would definitely stand out from the endless slaughter. I'll be waiting. Yi Guqin's tone was indifferent. On the other side, Hua Wuxiu also opened his mouth and said, Dugu Wubai, our battle is not over yet. Perhaps we can still spar in the ancient sword tomb. Hua Wuxiu would also head to the ancient sword tomb this time. Not only did he want to comprehend the supreme arts of the predecessors, but he also wanted to learn them. Furthermore, he wanted to perfect his trump card through the Heavenly Dao Stone Tablet. It could be said that in the ancient sword tomb, Hua Wuxiu and Yi Guqin would have a confrontation on a whole new level. That was a confrontation of swordsmanship talent and comprehension. Hua Wuxiu was confident that the power of his self-created trump card would definitely leave others in the dust and arouse the strongest resonance from the Heavenly Dao Stone Tablet. Hua Wuxiu would take back the glory that he lost in the 5 Academies tournament in the ancient sword tomb. Hearing Hua Wuxiu's words, the surrounding people were also curious. They more or less knew that although Hua Wuxiu had used most of his strength in this battle, he still had some tricks up his sleeve. Many people were also looking forward to the confrontation between the two. I, Dugu Wubai, will accept any challenge. Yi Guqin said in a carefree manner. This kind of bearing made people look askance. As for Shangguan Jingshan, Yin Zhu, and the rest, their faces were a little gloomy, and they left without saying anything. Especially Shangguan Jingshan, he was too ashamed to appear in front of Mu Xingzu again. Jiang Fengmian, on the other hand, showed a helpless smile at the corner of his mouth. Seeing this, Yi Guqin nodded slightly to Jiang Fengmian. Master, don't be so polite to that guy. Mu Xingzu could not help but snort with her pretty nose. Obviously, she was still upset about Jiang Fengmian's previous attack. Only Yi Guqin knew that Jiang Fengmian was still a little reserved and was not that kind of hypocrite. Amidst the sighs of countless people, the 5 Academies tournament finally came to an end. However, The storm brought about by Yiguchen had just begun. After a period of time, it would definitely cause a big disturbance in the entire Sword Dynasty. Of course, this had nothing to do with Yiguchen. What he needed to do now was to recuperate from his injuries, and then strengthen his strength again in the ancient sword tomb, and then prepare for the battle of the Sword Master with all his strength to become the Sword Master of the Sword Dynasty, and then participate in the battlefield of the Chosen Ones. Yiguchen believed that he could participate in the battlefield of the Chosen Ones as the Sword Master, or even as the Jiankui. After that, Yiguchen and the others embarked on the journey home. Mu Xingzu and the others also followed by his side. Several sword masters from the rogue cultivator camp also returned to Sacred Cliff College together. This time, all the martial artists in the rogue cultivator camp celebrated together. The disciples of Sacred Cliff College were even more excited. They looked at Yiguchen as if they were looking at a god. Yiguchen reversed the situation and established the victory with his own strength. This kind of light was really dazzling. After returning to Sacred Cliff College, Yiguchen attracted the admiration of all the disciples in the entire college. Even for someone like Ling Moyin, there was a look of admiration in her eyes that she was unaware of. It went from disgust to admiration. A woman's thoughts were so unpredictable. Of course, Xuanlian and Ling Mo Shu were also regarded as heroes. After all, they were all fighting for Sacred Cliff College. In particular, Ling Mo Shu, a fallen genius, rose again, and his strength was indeed impressive. Many disciples of the Divine Cliff College believed that Ling Mo Shu would be able to achieve a good performance even in the Battle of the Sword Master. After returning to the college, Yiguchen also began to recuperate from his injuries. Although the 5 Academies tournament did not involve killing, Yiguchen had accumulated many injuries in his body after continuous battles. If it were not for the perfect body and the body of the ancient god, Yiguchen's body would have been destroyed long ago. After recuperating for 7 or 8 days and taking many elixirs, coupled with the nourishment of the blood essence in the heart of the ancient god, Yiguchen had mostly recovered. Master, have you recovered from your injuries? The celebratory banquet over there has been urging you. Mu Xingzu's voice came from outside the cave. She did not return to Tianxian College, but followed Yiguchen. There's no need for that. Yiguchen shook his head lightly. After the 5 Academies tournament, Sacred Cliff College also held banquets for several days in a row. After all, Sacred Cliff College had been silent for too long. Now that they were proud and elated, they would naturally celebrate. However, Yiguchen preferred to be quiet and did not like the atmosphere of the banquet. Several sword masters are inviting Master. Mu Xingzu's voice came again. Yiguchen heard this, pondered for a moment, and got up. Since the sword masters invited him, he still had to go. What's more, he and Kenpo were old acquaintances. Later, Mu Xingzu brought Yiguchen to a palace in the Divine Cliff Cave. There was a hubbub of voices inside, and many disciples and elders of Sacred Cliff College were there. Kenpo and several other sword masters sat in the seats of honor, their faces covered with masks. Only Jian Shisan was missing. Chapter 1028. Seeing Yiguchen's arrival, the atmosphere in the palace became even more lively. Many Sacred Cliff College disciples looked at him with respect and admiration. Even Bei Xian Elder and the others nodded to Yiguchen. It could be said that Yiguchen's reputation in Sacred Cliff College had reached its peak. Yiguchen nodded to greet them one by one. Brother Dugu, are you feeling better? Kenpo asked with a smile. It's not a big deal. Yiguchen smiled. It's really difficult to invite you here, but you're really not bad, a female voice said. Yiguchen glanced at him, and his eyes were filled with surprise. The person who spoke was wearing a swordmaster mask and a tight suit that outlined her graceful curves. It was Jian Shi. Among the 13 sword masters, there were not many women. Jian Shi raised her wine cup and Yiguchen also raised his cup and returned the gesture. Jian Shi lifted a corner of her mask slightly, revealing her snow-white chin, and drank the wine. Dugu Wubai, I have to admit that your strength is indeed beyond my expectations. If there are no accidents, you have a great chance to win the position of sword master, Jian Shi said. Before, when Kenpo strongly praised Yiguchen, Jian Shi didn't believe it. However, after the Mount Saint crossing and the 5 academies competition, Jian Shi finally understood Yiguchen's true strength. Oh, does this sword master think that my master doesn't have the ability to defeat Jinkue? Hearing Jian Shi's words, Mu Xingzu raised her eyebrows. In her mind, Yiguchen was invincible among his peers. How could someone who could fight with Di Haotian be inferior to Jinkue? Jian Shi's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly under her mask. If it were an ordinary person who questioned her, she might have been impatient. However, Mu Xingzu was Wu Hongyan's favorite disciple. He was also qualified to compete for the position of Sword Son. His status and strength were not low. She said calmly, I do acknowledge Dugu Wubai's strength, but Jinkue is not that simple. Let me put it this way. Among the rogue cultivators, there are only 2 people who can fight Jinkue. Little 13 and Jian Jinghong. Little 13 naturally referred to Jian Shisan. As for Jian Jinghong, he was the vice alliance leader of the Way of the Sword, the disciple of Sword Sovereignty Tianqing. His strength was unquestionable. In Jian Shi's view, although Dugu Wubai's talent was extraordinary and his strength was not weak, he had only risen to power recently. He still did not have the ability to compete with Jinkue. How can my master be weaker than them? Mu Xingzu was slightly unhappy. Xingzhu, don't be rude, Yiguchen said calmly. Although Jian Shi's words were straightforward, his guess was not without reason. She was not the only one who thought so. Many people in the outside world probably thought so too. There was a high chance of becoming the Sword Son. However, it was very difficult to defeat Jinkue. Dugu Wubai, you are a prodigy of the rogue cultivators after all. When the battle for the position of Sword Son begins, we will help you. Little 13 will take care of Jinkue. You don't have to worry too much, Jian Shi said. Heh. Yiguchen smiled faintly and did not refute. When the time came, it was not certain who would be protecting who. All right, 11, Brother Dugu's ability may be far beyond your imagination, Kenpo said to smooth things over. He was the only one among the 13 sword sons who knew Yiguchen's true identity. He was someone who could go head-to-head with Di Haotian. Would he be afraid of Jinkue? Kenpo would not believe it. Yiguchen smiled and did not mind. Jian Shi was kind enough to let him pay attention to Jinkue. However, Jian Shi did not know that Yiguchen's strength had not been fully revealed in the 5 Academies tournament. Following which, they toasted each other and exchanged toasts. Yiguchen did not resist too much. After a series of battles, it was not bad to relax. In the end, the banquet was over, and only Kenpo and Yiguchen were left. Brother Yi, your performance this time was amazing. There was no one around, so Kenpo called Yiguchen by his real name. It was okay. Hua Wuxiu did not use his full strength, not to mention Jinkue. In Yiguchen's heart, there was always a trace of vigilance towards Sword Leader. Even Su Qingyu once said that Jinkue's soul fluctuations were very chaotic and unpredictable. Jinkue is indeed very strong, but his identity is a mystery. He does not seem to be a genius of the 5 pseudo-saint aristocratic families, Kenpo said in a slightly dignified tone. It seems that Jinkue does have secrets, Yiguchen muttered to himself. With Brother Ye's strength, you should be fine as long as you are careful. Moreover, in this battle for the Sword Sun position, our camp of individual cultivators has a trump card. It will definitely surprise the Sword Sons of the aristocratic families, Kenpo said with a mysterious smile. Oh, you have a trump card? Yiguchen raised his eyebrows slightly. It seemed that the Sword Sons of individual cultivators were not completely unprepared. Of course, you still have to be careful. It's hard to guarantee that the aristocratic families will not use any tricks, Kenpo warned. Yiguchen nodded slightly. I'm very curious. If Brother Yi participates in the Battle of Geniuses as Jinkue and is exposed in the end, perhaps the entire Nantian region will be shocked, Kenpo said with a smile. That day will not be far away. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed and his tone was serious. He had not forgotten about Di Haotian and Gu Xiaoyang. After that, the two chatted for a while and then left. Not long after leaving the palace, Yi Guchen suddenly stopped in his tracks. On a cliff in front of him, there was a figure sitting alone on the rock wall. He was holding a wine pot in one hand and the ghost mask on his face was half lifted, revealing his chin and drinking. On his back was a blood-red long sword. It was Jian Shusan. Under the pale and cold moon, a figure wearing a ghost mask and drinking alone under the moon. This scene looked desolate and strange. Jian Shusan. Yi Guchen muttered to himself. He did not go to the banquet like the other sword sons, but drank alone here. Yi Guchen felt that Jian Shusan had some secrets. Of course, that was Jian Shusan's own business and had nothing to do with Yi Guchen. He had no intention of prying. As if sensing Yi Guchen's arrival, Jian Shusan put on his ghost mask again and then threw the wine pot to Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen took the wine pot and looked at Jian Shusan with some doubt. If you want to live, don't participate in the battle of the sword sun, Jian Shusan said in a hoarse voice and then left in a flash. Yi Guchen was stunned and his expression was grave. What did Jian Shusan mean by warning him? Did he think that he would also be killed by Jiankui? Or, did he have other intentions? After pondering for a while, Yi Guchen did not understand. He took a sip of the wine in the wine pot and frowned. This wine was very bitter and hot to the throat. Ordinary people would not be able to swallow it. Jian Shusan, what do you mean? Yi Guchen muttered. First, he suddenly attacked him in the sword tomb, and now he warned him with such words. But no matter what, Yi Guchen was not afraid of challenges. He would not give up on the battle of the sword sun. In the next few days, Yi Guchen was also meditating and preparing for the journey to the ancient sword tomb. On the other side, the Hua family made a move. Chapter 1029. Tiandu Ridge, Hua family. After the 5 academies competition, the entire Hua family seemed to be shrouded in a layer of dark clouds. It had to be said that Hua Wuxiu's failure had disappointed the entire Hua family. Of course, no one dared to say anything to Hua Wuxiu. At this moment, the handsome and calm Hua Wuxiu, with his hands behind his back, walked to a dusty pavilion. He entered, pressed his hand against the wall, and twisted a button. A deep and dark passage appeared. Hua Wuxiu entered, and not long after, light appeared in front of him. Looking around, it was a brightly lit underground secret room. Unlike the dark and damp secret rooms, this secret room was warm and bright. In the secret room, there was a girl who was about 10 years old, playing with a puppet. Seeing Hua Wuxiu's arrival, the girl suddenly stood up and hurriedly ran to Hua Wuxiu's side, saying, "Young Master Hua, is he here? Don't worry, the time is coming. It won't be long before you can meet." Hua Wuxiu smiled faintly and reached out to touch the girl's little head. "Is that so? That's great." The girl cheered. Looking at the girl's happy face, Hua Wuxiu's eyes flashed with a dark light. "In this sword sun battle, what I want is for the individual cultivator camp to be completely annihilated. Dugu Wubai, cherish the last moments of your life." In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed since the 5 academies competition. In this half a month, the entire sword dynasty was shaken by Yi Guchen's performance. Some people were even curious about Yi Guchen's performance in the ancient sword tomb. Would he obtain some super powerful swordsmanship inheritance? TSK, Dugu Wubai created unprecedented miracles in Mount Saint Crossing and the sword tomb. I wonder if he will perform amazingly in the ancient sword tomb. The ancient sword tomb mainly tests one's understanding of swordsmanship and even self-created sword moves. Although Dugu Wubai's talent is very strong, he can't be good at everything, right? This time, I heard that the sword sovereign's disciple, Jian Jinghong, is also going to enter the ancient sword tomb. He is a god-favored one with the creation-level sword essence. In terms of swordsmanship, Jian Jinghong is definitely not weaker than Dugu Wubai. Then let's wait and see if Dugu Wubai can continue to be outstanding in the ancient sword tomb this time. Many warriors in the entire sword dynasty were also rushing to the ancient sword tomb. They all wanted to know if Yi Guqin, who had created miracles in the 2 mystic realms and the 5 academies competition, could continue his legend in the ancient sword tomb. Within Divine Cliff Academy. After half a month of recuperation, Yi Guqin had finally recovered to his peak state. It's almost time for the ancient sword tomb to open. I'm really looking forward to it, Yi Guqin muttered. There was no doubt that the Sword Sun battle was very dangerous. The ancient sword tomb was the last place where Yi Guqin could improve his strength. He naturally valued it very much. Perhaps it was also a great opportunity to practice the 4 moves of 10,000 God Tribulation and Ultimate Sword Domain. As soon as Yi Guqin left the cave abode, there were Sacred Cliff College disciples waiting outside to inform Yi Guqin that it was time to set off. Then, Yi Guqin arrived outside Sacred Cliff College. He found that everyone had finished recuperating and was waiting for him. The ancient sword tomb was a rare opportunity, so most of the Sacred Cliff College disciples would go together. Senior Dugu is here. Senior Dugu, are you done recuperating? Many disciples around expressed their concern. Yi Guqin nodded with a faint smile. Although he did not stay in Sacred Cliff College for long, the atmosphere was very good. Of course, this was also because of Yi Guqin's performance. I'm afraid that the entire Sword Dynasty wants to see Brother Dugu's performance in the ancient sword tomb, Xuanlian said with a smile. I'll just do my best, Yi Guqin said. Yi Guqin was not a god. He did not think that he could create miracles in any field. I heard that Jian Jingheng will be here too. He's also a prodigy from the Lone Cultivator camp. Maybe you can get to know him, Kenpo said. Other than Jian Shisan, the other sword sons from the Lone Cultivator camp were here too. They had entered the ancient sword tomb several times, so they would not enter this time. They were just here to watch the show. I'm also very curious as to how powerful Jian Jingheng, who possesses the sword will of the creation realm, is. Yi Guqin revealed an interested expression. Alright, let's go. Bei Xian Elder waved his hand. He was the leader this time. Then, everyone boarded the ship and headed to the ancient sword tomb, Ancient Cloud Ridge. At the same time that Sacred Cliff College set off, the people from the other 4 colleges also headed to Ancient Cloud Ridge. Ancient Cloud Ridge was one of the 360 ridges of the Sword Dynasty. It was famous because of the ancient sword tomb. It was rumored that there was a tablet of Heaven's Way at the ancient sword tomb. Anyone who stood before the tablet of Heaven's Way would be able to comprehend various swordsmanship opportunities. Then, many powerful warriors of the Sword Dynasty left their swordsmanship around the tablet of Heaven's Way for future generations to comprehend. Over time, the ancient sword tomb was formed. However, the tablet of Heaven's Way possessed a special power that would be consumed. Therefore, the ancient sword tomb would only open at a specific time. This time, it was opened because of the Sword Sun battle. 2 days later, Sacred Cliff College's ship finally entered Ancient Cloud Ridge. Not long after, Yi Guqin saw a mountain range in front of him. Many densely packed figures covered the ground like a swarm of ants. After hearing the news, many warriors gathered outside the ancient sword tomb. They wanted to see the performance of the disciples from the 5 colleges. Is that the ancient sword tomb? Yi Guqin looked into the distance. In the mountain range in the distance, various sword auras and mysterious auras intertwined. Stone tablets were scattered all over the place. On them were records of the sword techniques and martial arts of the predecessors. In the deepest part of the mountain range, a faint light could be seen. It was as if there was a stone tablet in the middle, releasing a mysterious aura. That should be the tablet of Heaven's Way, Yi Guqin said to himself. At this moment, many people around the ancient sword tomb noticed the arrival of Sacred Cliff College. Sacred Cliff College is here. Is that the natural saint, Dugu Wubai? He's indeed extraordinary. I wonder if he can comprehend a profound technique in the ancient sword tomb. That's hard to say. Yi Guqin's arrival undoubtedly caused a stir. At this moment, the people from the other colleges arrived one after another. Almost all of them were from the 5 colleges' grand competition. Hua Wuxiu, Jiang Fengmian, Yin Zhu, Shenguan Jingshen, Ouyang Fengyun, and the others were all there. When they saw Yi Guqin, except for Hua Wuxiu and Jiang Fengmian, the other prodigies on the sword ranking had ugly expressions. I don't believe that you can still create a record in the ancient sword tomb. Yin Zhu gritted his teeth coldly. In the ancient sword tomb, he had witnessed Yi Guqin create a record with his own eyes. Naturally, he did not want to see Yi Guqin continue to be in the limelight in the ancient sword tomb. Dugu Wubai, let's compete again this time. Hua Wuxiu's lips curled into a smile. Sure. Yi Guqin was calm and composed. Just as the two of them were arguing, a person on a sword appeared in the distant sky and rushed over. How can I miss out on such an exciting scene? Accompanied by a voice full of battle intent, a young man with an arrogant posture and high spirits appeared. That's Jian Jinghong. Countless martial artists widened their eyes and exclaimed. Chapter 1030. This young man was dressed in black and had a handsome face. His black hair fluttered in the air, and he had an unruly and wild temperament. He also had a high fighting spirit. The most obvious feature of his body was the pale white sword mark between his eyebrows. It emitted an extremely mysterious wave that was somewhat similar to the heavenly Tao stone tablet. Who else could this person be but Jian Jinghong? The successor of the sword sovereign has finally appeared. Yes, before Dugu Wubai appeared, he was also considered to be the most powerful contender for Jiankui. Jian Jinghong's arrival undoubtedly caused a stir. Yi Guqin also looked over. This was the first time he had seen the second-ranked prodigy on the sword leaderboard. Rumor had it that Jian Jinghong was born with a sword intent between his eyebrows. It was the embryonic form of the heavenly Tao sword intent. The heavenly Tao sword intent was a creation-level sword intent. Even among the creation-level sword intents, it was considered the top. Therefore, even if it was just the embryonic form of the heavenly Tao sword intent, Jian Jinghong's talent in the sword Tao far exceeded that of ordinary people. Previously, in the 3 heavenly gates test, Jian Jinghong's talent was ranked first. Later on, he was surpassed by Yi Guqin. Seeing Jian Jinghong's arrival, the prodigies on the side of the aristocratic families all had extremely solemn expressions. Even Hua Wuxiu frowned slightly. Jian Jinghong was indeed a big threat. This person's aura is actually somewhat similar to the heavenly Tao stone tablet. Yi Guqin was slightly surprised. He felt that Jian Jinghong's entire body carried a special aura, as if he had merged with the heavenly Tao. It was a complete and flawless body. No wonder before coming to the ancient sword tomb, he had heard of the 9th level. This time, the person most likely to break the record in the ancient sword tomb was Jian Jinghong. This was because his aura was too compatible with the heavenly Tao stone tablet. Seeing Jian Jinghong's arrival, there was another person who could not calm down. It was the pride of Tianxian College, Suki Miyazaki. She was previously the pride of the heavenly Tao, ranked 8th on the sword leaderboard. She was proud and arrogant and somewhat overbearing. However, in a spar, she had been defeated by Jian Jinghong. From then on, he saw Jian Jinghong as his goal. Even the newly risen Yi Guqin, she did not think that he could compare to Jian Jinghong. Jian Jinghong, you finally appeared. This time, I'm going to compete with you again in the ancient sword tomb, Suki Miyazaki muttered to herself. However, Jian Jinghong did not notice Suki Miyazaki at all. Instead, he looked at Yi Guqin and said with some interest, "You're the newly risen natural saint, the Dugu Wubai who broke my record in the sword catacomb." Seeing is believing. In Jian Jinghong's eyes, Yi Guqin's aura was deep and reserved. His body also seemed to contain a trace of an aura that made him somewhat fearful. Jian Jinghong possessed the embryonic form of the heavenly Tao sword intent. Something that even the embryonic form of the heavenly Tao sword intent feared was enough to pique Jian Jinghong's interest. Naturally, he did not know that Yi Guqin had also comprehended the creation-level sword intent of all creation. Hearing Jian Jinghong's words, Yi Guqin smiled faintly and cupped his hands slightly. Jian Jinghong, I've heard a lot about you. No matter what, Jian Jinghong was sword sovereign Yi Tianqing's disciple. Yi Guqin had a good impression of Yi Tianqing. His disciple's character should not be too bad. And from the looks of it, Yi Tianqing did not tell Jian Jinghong his true identity. Although we can't compete in martial arts in the ancient sword tomb this time, there are very few who can beat me in terms of sword comprehension. Jian Jinghong smiled. This was not arrogance or insolence. It was the truth. I don't seek fame when comprehending sword techniques. What suits me is the best, Yi Guqin replied calmly. He did not intend to purposely break any records. He would let nature take its course. Ha! As expected of a natural saint who has caught the eye of master. When the time comes for the battle to become the sword's son, I'll help you block that Jiankui. Jian Jinghong laughed heartily when he heard that. Yi Guqin was a prodigy from the itinerant cultivator camp. He had interacted with Yi Tianqing before. Jian Jinghong naturally had a good impression of Yi Guqin. Of course, his eyes were also surging with battle intent. If there was a chance, he would definitely spar with Yi Guqin. Thank you. Yi Guqin nodded. In fact, he did not need the help of others to deal with Jiankui. However, there was no need to say it out loud. The prodigies from the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty and Jian Jinghong were all present. Only the mysterious prodigy who ranked first on the sword leaderboard, Z, did not come. Brother Jian, is the person ranked first on the sword leaderboard not coming? Yi Guqin was a little curious. He had been in the Sword Dynasty for so long, but he had never seen Z, who had suppressed all the prodigies on the sword leaderboard. Yi Guqin was also curious about this prodigy who could suppress Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxiu. That freak. Jian Jinghong's expression did not look very good. Oh. Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows. Don't worry about him. In fact, I don't know who he is either. His identity is a mystery, and he's extremely powerful. In short, just don't provoke him. He won't interfere in the battle between the itinerant cultivators and the aristocratic families, Jian Jinghong said. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. A moment later, Bei Xian Elder and the other leaders of the 5 great academies stepped out at the same time, holding a seal in their hands. The 5 of them activated their seals at the same time. In an instant, the entire mountain range shook. Formation patterns appeared on the ground and melted like snow. There was a formation around the ancient sword tomb. Only when the 5 seals were activated at the same time could the formation be undone. As the formation was undone, an even more powerful and mysterious aura spread out like a geyser. Some of the martial artists and sword cultivators standing at the edge of the ancient sword tomb felt their 5 senses become clearer, and their sea of consciousness became extremely clear. Some of the sword techniques that were difficult to cultivate were also enlightened at this moment. What a mysterious aura. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up. It was different from the sword tomb. The sword tomb focused on the cultivation of sword intent. The ancient sword tomb, on the other hand, sharpened one's 5 senses and made one's mind more flexible. It also allowed one to have an epiphany and cultivate various sword techniques with ease. Prodigies, you may enter now. Whether or not you can comprehend the sword techniques of the predecessors will depend on your luck. Also, those who are capable can use the Heavenly Tao stone tablet to practice your own sword techniques, but don't force yourself, an elder from the academy said. Most prodigies had a chance to comprehend the sword techniques of the predecessors. The only difference was that the sword techniques they comprehended varied in strength. However, using the Heavenly Tao stone tablet to create one's own sword technique was 1 in a million. Many of the sword techniques that people created were simply useless or extremely weak and worthless. There were very few people who could really create a martial art that was comparable to an emperor-level sword technique. Therefore, most of the prodigies did not have the ability to create their own sword techniques. This time, Jian Jinghong is most likely to create his own sword technique. After all, he has the embryonic form of the Heavenly Tao sword intent and will resonate with the Heavenly Tao stone tablet. Hua Wuxiu is also likely. His light and darkness sage constitution is enough for him to comprehend the light and darkness sword Dao. Some of the martial artists could not help but guess. Self-created unique techniques. I'm looking forward to it. Yi Guqin's eyes flickered as he stepped into the ancient sword tomb with the other prodigies. Chapter 1031. As one of the 4 secret realms of the Sword Dynasty, the opening of the ancient sword tomb was very rare. Therefore, all the sky prides could not wait to enter the tomb. Dugu, there's a time limit to the opening of the ancient sword tomb, so you don't have to comprehend the most difficult sword moves. It's best to comprehend the most suitable ones. Bei Xian Elder's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Guqin's ears. Bei Xian Elder was also a little worried that Yi Guqin would choose the most difficult sword moves and waste a lot of time. In the past, there were many talented sky prides who were proud and arrogant and chose difficult sword moves that they could not comprehend. In the end, all their efforts were in vain. With Yi Guqin's current reputation, it would be a little embarrassing if such a situation occurred. Elder, don't worry. Yi Guqin nodded. He would not make such a low-level mistake. As soon as Yi Guqin stepped into the ancient sword tomb, he immediately felt a different aura. There were stone tablets all over the mountain range. In addition, there were many sword marks left behind by predecessors on the walls of the isolated cliff. There were also sword move scrolls left behind by predecessors in some stone caves. All in all, there were definitely many opportunities for swordsmanship in the ancient sword tomb. However, it was not that easy to comprehend them. Otherwise, everyone would be able to obtain an emperor-level sword technique. Sigh, I wonder how many sky prides will be able to comprehend an emperor-level sword technique this time. Yes, most of the sword moves left behind in the ancient sword tomb are obscure and difficult to comprehend. Ordinary sky prides can only comprehend a supreme-level king-level sword technique at most. As for an emperor-level sword technique, even an inferior level one is difficult to comprehend. As all the sky prides entered the ancient sword tomb, the martial artists surrounding the tomb began to whisper to each other. I hope Wuxiu will be able to gain something this time, Huaimo muttered on the ship of Tensei College. Hua Yuntao did not come this time. He must have been very angry with Yi Guqin last time. At this moment, some geniuses had already found the lost sword moves and were preparing to comprehend them on their own. A Sacred Cliff College disciple was sitting cross-legged in front of a ruin. He suddenly took out a leaf and put it in his mouth to comprehend it. That's an epiphany leaf. Sacred Cliff College is so extravagant. They actually give it to ordinary students. Some warriors saw it and found it inconceivable. However, that was not all. One by one, the Sacred Cliff College students found their own spots and began to comprehend the swordsmanship. They all took out the leaf of enlightenment. What the hell? Everyone was dumbfounded. Even Hua Mo and Elder Yinli from Long River College were stunned. Since when did the Tree of Enlightenment become so worthless? Looking at this situation, the Heavenly Saint, Sun Moon, and Long River disciples who had entered the ancient sword tomb turned as black as the bottom of a pot. One could imagine how effective the enlightenment leaf was in comprehending sword moves. Yes and no were two completely different concepts. Bei Xian, why does Sacred Cliff College have so many epiphany leaves? Hua Mo couldn't help but ask. Could it be that Sacred Cliff College has an epiphany ancient tree? However, the Epiphany ancient tree was the top and rarest sacred herb. Usually, only the overlord forces would have such a good item. Would I tell you? Bei Xian Elder looked at Hua Mo as if he was an idiot. For a moment, the faces of the elders from the 3 major academies in the aristocratic family camp were as black as the bottom of a pot. Looking at this scene, Yi Guqin smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Of course, he was the one who took out the epiphany leaves. However, he only told Bei Xian Elder that he had a chance encounter and obtained some epiphany leaves. This was Yi Guqin's way of repaying Sacred Cliff College's kindness in cultivating him. It was conceivable that the Sacred Cliff College disciples who had the epiphany leaves would gain more than the other 4 academies. At this moment, Ling Mo Shu came in front of a stone tablet, his eyes shining brightly. This is the sword technique I need. Ling Emoshu sat down without hesitation, took out the epiphany leaf, and began to comprehend it. Hey, that stone tablet seems to have recorded the left-handed Grandmaster Song Chuyu's inferior emperor-level sword technique. Some martial artists could not help but exclaim in surprise when they saw the place where Ling Mashu sat cross-legged. Although there were many inheritances in the ancient sword tomb, there were only a few emperor-level sword techniques, so it was easy to identify them. However, it was easy to find them, but difficult to comprehend them. I hope this kid can succeed, Bei Xian elder murmured. In addition, Xuanlian also sat in front of a mountain wall to comprehend the martial arts left behind by a Buddhist swordsman. Kong Kong, Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and the others did the same. They found suitable sword techniques and took out the epiphany leaves to comprehend. Only a few people from the Divine Cliff Academy were left, and they were still searching. Yi Guqin was one of them. It was not that Yi Guqin was arrogant but incompetent. It was just an ordinary inferior emperor-level sword technique, which was not very useful to Yi Guqin. His godly sword lightning controlling technique and the 3 ultimate holy swords were not weak. Therefore, Yi Guqin needed a sword technique of a higher level. As time passed, the prodigies also began to comprehend. I've finally found it. Shangguan Jingshan sat in front of a flaming stone tablet, his eyes flashing with fire. Yin Zhu, Jiang Fengmian, Ouyang Fengyun, and the others also found inferior emperor-level sword techniques suitable for them. Mu Xingzu, under the guidance of Ying Ning in her mind, found a sword technique that cultivated soul attacks and began to comprehend it. In the end, only Jian Jinghong, Hua Wuxiu, and Yi Guqin had not made a choice. Interesting. One of them is ranked 2nd on the sword leaderboard, the other is ranked 3rd, and the other is a born saint. They haven't found a sword technique suitable for them. Maybe they're ambitious and don't want to choose inferior emperor-level sword techniques. Outside the ancient sword tomb, the crowd was discussing. At that moment, Jian Jinghong stood in front of a jade tablet, his eyes surging with light. That stone tablet, could it be left behind by the Sky Sword Sage? Rumor has it that the sword technique recorded on the stone tablet is a superior emperor-level sword technique. It's said that when this technique is used, the sword chi will seal the heavens and the earth. It's extremely powerful. Seeing Jian Jinghong's choice, the crowd outside the ancient sword tomb exclaimed. It was a superior emperor-level sword technique. Although there was only a difference of 1 grade between inferior and medial level, the difficulty of comprehending and the power was worlds apart. At the same time, Hua Wuxiu also found a stone tablet. That stone tablet was left behind by an ancestor of the Sword Dynasty, a false saint expert. It also records a superior emperor-level sword technique. Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxiu's choices shocked the crowd. The other prodigies on the sword leaderboard might not succeed in comprehending an inferior emperor-level sword technique. Both of them chose the more difficult intermediate emperor-level sword technique. At that moment, everyone's eyes could not help but look at Yi Guqin. What kind of technique would the famous born saint of the Sword Dynasty choose to comprehend? Yi Guqin's footsteps moved. He went deep into the ancient sword tomb and finally stood in front of the 8 majestic mountains. These 8 mountains were very conspicuous in the ancient sword tomb. Yi Guqin looked up and saw that each of the 8 mountains had a sword mark that was 1,000 feet long. It was as if the whole mountain had been divided into 2. Most of the sword techniques in the ancient sword tomb were recorded on the stone tablets. Only this sword technique was recorded on the 8 towering mountains. That sword technique is, when they saw Yi Guqin standing in front of the 8 mountains, everyone seemed to have stopped breathing. Their pupils shrank and they looked extremely surprised. Chapter 1032. That sword art was left behind by my Sword Dynasty's Sword Dao Alliance Master, the proud Divine Continent. Bei Xian Elder's pupils widened, his breathing quickened, and he muttered absent-mindedly. The Sword Dao Alliance Master, the proud Divine Continent, was definitely a legendary figure in the Sword Dynasty. His strength was extraordinary, and ordinary false saints were no match for him. It could be said that part of the reason why the Sword Dynasty could become the leader of the 100 great dynasties and suppress the war god, Maluo, domineering blade, and other top dynasties was because of the proud divine continent. Within the dynasty, there was a legend. The proud divine continent actually had the ability to directly become a heavenly tribulation saint. However, he was not satisfied with this. He wanted to achieve perfection in his sword Tao and break into the saint realm in the most perfect state. Therefore, he entered the heavenless sword realm to find an opportunity and was trapped inside. It could be said that the sword art left behind by such a legendary figure was absolutely extraordinary and exquisite. No one expected that Yi Guqin would stop before the sword art left behind by the proud divine continent. I remember that the 8 Peaks recorded a sword art left behind by the Alliance Master, the proud divine continent. I'm afraid the grade has reached the level of a high-grade emperor-level sword art. Many warriors could not hide the surprise on their faces. In the past, when the ancient sword tomb opened, it was not that there were no geniuses who chose to comprehend the sword art of the proud divine continent. But in the end, without exception, they all failed. Therefore, Hua Wuxiu, Jian Jinghong, and the others did not choose this sword art. Firstly, it was not suitable, and secondly, it was too difficult. The difficulty of comprehending a mid-grade emperor-level sword art was several times higher than that of a low-grade one. And the difficulty of a high-grade emperor-level sword art was even higher than that of a mid-grade emperor-level sword art. Dugu Wubai won't really choose this sword art, right? Outside the ancient sword tomb, everyone was watching. They all wanted to know what choice Yi Guqin would make. Ignorant child, how can anyone comprehend the absolute art left behind by the Alliance Master? Hua Mo smiled coldly. If the sword art of the proud divine continent was so easy to comprehend, then there would have been geniuses who would have comprehended it long ago. At this moment, Yi Guqin sat cross-legged in front of the 8 Peaks, took out the Epiphany leaf, put it in his mouth, and began to comprehend. He really chose the Alliance Master's absolute art. Seeing this, a commotion broke out outside the ancient sword tomb. The sword technique left behind by the proud divine continent could be said to be one of the most difficult sword techniques to comprehend in the ancient sword tomb. It wasn't just the people in the outer circle. Even some of the sky prides in the ancient sword tomb were slightly alarmed as they looked in the direction of Yi Guqin. In front of a stone tablet, Suki Miyazaki opened her beautiful eyes and looked in Yi Guqin's direction. Then, she shook her head slightly. You didn't even choose Jian Jinghong. Can you really comprehend it? Even Jian Jinghong, who possessed the embryonic form of the heavenly Tao sword intent, did not choose that sword art. It would be very difficult for Yi Guqin to comprehend it. Oh, interesting. Jian Jinghong was also surprised by Yi Guqin's choice. Dugu Wubai, are you really capable, or are you just putting on a front? Hua Wuxiu muttered to himself. He no longer dared to underestimate Yi Guqin. In the sky, several sword suns stood side by side. Jian Shi clicked his tongue and said, Dugu Wubai's actions are slightly unwise. Not to mention whether he can comprehend it in the end. Even if he can, it will almost exhaust his time. After that, I'm afraid he won't have much time to go to the heavenly Tao stone tablet to comprehend it. I believe that Brother Dugu has his own thoughts. Have you ever seen him suffer a loss? Kenpo said with a smile. I haven't. Jian Shi was at a loss for words. Since Yi Guqin's rise, he seemed to have never suffered a loss. Ignoring the discussions outside, Yi Guqin was immersed in comprehending within the ancient sword tomb. With his talent, sword demon's comprehension, and the enlightenment ancient tree in his body constantly releasing Tao aura, Yi Guqin believed that he was confident that he could comprehend the sword technique left behind by the proud divine continent. He released his soul stone and enveloped the 8 mountain peaks. Vaguely, Yi Guqin seemed to see an incomparably imposing figure with his back facing him. He held the sword in his hand and suddenly swung it out. The moment the sword was unleashed, the sky seemed to be about to collapse. Unleashing the second sword, the earth seemed to be about to shatter. The third sword was unleashed, sword chi swept out like a tsunami. The fourth sword, the sword momentum was like a wildfire. Then the fifth sword, the sixth sword, each sword corresponded to the sword mark on a mountain peak. The 8 mountain peaks represented the proud divine continent. This sword move had a total of 8 moves. After roughly comprehending, Yiguchen also finally knew the name of this sword move. 8 Extreme Reincarnation Sword Art. What a profound sword technique. This sword move uses the 8 trigrams as the foundation. Each trigram corresponds to a sword. The power reaches high-grade emperor-level sword technique. If the 8 swords are unleashed at the same time, heaven and earth reincarnate. The power is even comparable to a supreme-grade emperor-level sword technique. Yiguchen was slightly amazed in his heart. The 8 trigrams were Qian, Kun, Kan, Li, Sun, Zhen, Zhen, Dui. They corresponded to heaven, earth, water, fire, wind, thunder, mountain, pond. Each trigram represented a sword move. In the end, if the 8 moves could be combined, the power would probably reach the peak of an emperor-level sword technique. This sword technique is indeed more powerful than the 3 ultimate holy swords and the divine sword lightning controlling technique. Yiguchen was excited. Of course, the difficulty of comprehending it was proportional to its power. Even with Yiguchen's ability, it was not that easy to comprehend it. However, Yiguchen was also confident. He was completely immersed in comprehending it. Time also passed day by day. Generally speaking, the ancient sword tomb would be open for a month. However, this time, because of the sword master battle, the time was extended to 2 months. However, even if it was 2 months, it was extremely difficult to comprehend a low-grade emperor-level sword technique. Not to mention mid-grade and superior-grade ones. In addition, there was still the heavenly Tao stone tablet to comprehend. Although ordinary geniuses did not have the ability to create their own sword techniques, they could at least use the heavenly Tao stone tablet to improve their sword techniques. It would also take a lot of time to comprehend in the heavenly Tao stone tablet. In this way, the 2 months were even more pressing. In the blink of an eye, more than half a month had passed. Many of the geniuses opened their tired eyes, their faces ashen. Most of the geniuses had failed to comprehend a low-grade emperor-level sword technique. Those who had comprehended a supreme-grade emperor-level sword technique had all succeeded. Sigh, it's still too difficult. Some geniuses shook their heads. The people outside also saw all of this. They were not surprised. Suddenly, sword chi fluctuations burst out from a place in the ancient sword tomb. Hey, a genius has succeeded. It's Ling Mo Shu from Sacred Cliff College. Many people were attracted. They looked over and saw Ling Mo Shu holding a sword in his left hand. The sword chi was unparalleled. He had comprehended a low-grade emperor-level sword technique. Not long after, Ling Moyin, Kong Kong, Xuanlian, Mu Xingzu, and the others' bodies shook. They had also comprehended their own sword techniques. Could it be because of the Epiphany leaf? Seeing this, the crowd could not help but guess. Quite a few of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples had succeeded in comprehending it. This made the faces of Hua Mo and the other elders of the aristocratic families darken. Is there still no movement from Dugu Wubai? Ling Moyin's eyes were slightly worried. Trust brother Dugu. Let's go to the heavenly Tao stone tablet first, Ling Mo Shu said. Time was of the essence. After a few more days, Jiang Fengmian, Yin Zhu, Shengguan Jingshen, and the others had also comprehended one after another. As the top 10 of the sword roll, they were still very talented. Dugu Wubai, a greedy snake wants to swallow an elephant. Yin Zhu sneered and rushed to the location of the heavenly Tao stone tablet. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.